Welcome, everyone. Well, it's good afternoon and welcome everyone to South and West Plan panels. My name is Councillor Taylor and I'll be chairing this, what should I call it, vibrant committee meeting today and so forth. So today's meeting is South and West, and today's meeting is being live streamed and Leeds City Council YouTube channels so that public can observe the meeting without needs to be present. South and West Plan panels is here to all the relevant information from applicants, members of the public and council officers to help members and the panel to make their decision. Could I now invite officers and members to introduce themselves? We've got two new councillors on our panel, which could you said your name when I go around. So I'm going to start on the right today. So because we normally go left, but I'm going to go to the right today.
That woke me up. Good afternoon, members. Steve Butler, Group Manager for South and West Leeds and Lead Officer at South and West Plans Panel. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Jonathan Carr, Head of Development Management.
Good afternoon and welcome new members. Nikki Diol, I'm the legal advisor to this plans panel.
Amy Davis, Principal Legal Officer.
Hello everyone, Natasha Prosser, Clerk to the panel.
Yeah, afternoon, Councillor Barry Anderson, Adlan Wharfdale Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Trish Smith, Podgy Ward.
Good afternoon, everyone. Councillor Colin Campbell.
Good afternoon, Toby.
For the benefit of those people who are desperately interested over there, I'm representing all the wards that aren't going to get a name check.
Good afternoon, Toby Russell, Senior Technical Officer.
Good afternoon, Councillor Jordan Bowden, Roundhay Ward.
Good afternoon, everybody. Councillor Neil Walshaw, Headingley and Hyde Park.
Good afternoon, Councillor Denise Reagan, Beaumont Toss and Richmond Hill Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor John Garvani, Horsforth Ward.
Good afternoon, everyone. Councillor Sharon Hamilton, Meanwood and Moortown Ward.
Good afternoon, Ahmed Hunaidi, Highways Officer.
Good afternoon, Lawrence Hill, Principal Planning Officer.
Thank you. Before I go further, Mark, would you like to introduce yourselves and say the reason why you're here?
Good afternoon, Martin White. I'm here on work experience.
Thank you, and you're more than welcome. Before I go further in the meeting, could I thank Councillor Walshaw to stand in for me while I was away, and also to welcome our new members and the committee. Councillor Eswood supposed to join us, but I'm afraid she's poorly today, so she won't be able to join us. So we like to put on record to thank the members who are no longer with us and this group, who is Councillor Burke, Councillor Collins, and Paul Ray and Councillor Jenkins. Would like to thank them for the work that they have done and the committee. We have also have a new Secretary who is Tosh, because Andy of Levers. Welcome, Tosh, to South and West. And for all the remaining members, remember this is a lovely, calm committee, and we'd like to keep it this way throughout the year. And welcome back. Thank you. So, item 1.
Thanks, Chair. There's no appeals against refusal of inspection of documents. Agenda item 2, there's no exempt items today. Agenda item 3, there's no formal late items. Agenda item 4, can I ask members to declare any interest? I'll take silence as none.
Tash, could I? This is highly unusual, but I'm conflicted on one of the items because the applicant is known to me in a personal capacity, and therefore I will be stepping out of that item 8, and my colleague Amy Davison will be providing legal advice for members.
Thanks, Nikki. Agenda item 5, apologies are being received from Councillor Finnegan and Councillor Heatherwood.
Thank you. not to go on, could we just move straight on to minutes of the previous meeting? I wasn't at the meeting, I watched the video, but I would also rely on Councillor Walsh to agree with me, with the members, if that meeting was okay. So do members read the report, the minutes? Yeah.
Sorry, Chair. There's just a very small typo on page 10. It's the first item, item 8, and it's the third bullet point. I think there's an extra P, just for clarity.
Any more?
No, recognised.
Thank you. Any other? So could someone please approve the minutes? Second. Thank you, Councillor Smith. Any matters arising from the minutes? No, say that as no. We will now move straight on to item 7, Albert House. So could I invite the planning officer to take us through this application? Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. The application before members today is for 4 new dwellings to the rear of Albert House. The application is brought to Plans Panel at the request of Councillor Flint due to the potential impact the development will have on the Far Headingley Conservation Area, the level of local concern and the material planning issues which have been highlighted by residents. As members can see on the screen here, this is the aerial photograph which shows the application site within the centre of the site. The application property is Albert House, which forms one of 3 large Victorian villas, as you can see on the aerial photograph there. Albert House has. Yeah, that's my best answer. Yeah, sorry. Albert House is this large Victorian villa here, and there's three former Victorian villas which form part of the development. As you can see on the screen, the other 2 villas have been developed with housing to the front of this one and development to the rear of the one adjacent to Albert House. To the front of the site is a large front garden area which is characterised by large mature trees with TPOs and conservation area designation protecting all the trees within the site. The wider area, I should say as well, the site is within Far Headingley Conservation Area in which the property is designated as a positive building. The wider area, as you can see, is predominantly characterised by tight-knit residential development with semi-detached properties located on the adjacent or park villas and modern terracing to the rear of the site. The wider area is predominantly terrace properties, tight-knit terrace properties, stone heritage terracing forming a majority of part of this part of the conservation area. Just moving on to some of the photographs. As members saw on the site visit this morning, it's a grand Victorian villa which sits in spacious grounds and particularly at the front of the property. This forms the positive spatial setting for the large villa. At the rear, you can see that the rear elevation, large sort of grassed area, and I should say that the coach house here, which is a former ancillary building, is a separate dwelling, so there are two dwellings on the site. Moving on, just a photograph which again shows the large lawn area to the rear, mature hedging to the side. As you can see, more part villas beyond the rear boundary there. Another photograph, this is to the side. This area is private garden space for Albert House, and this will be retained as such part of the development. And again, you can see the semi-detached rendered properties on more part villas. and there's another photograph of just showing across the site. Again, you can see the mature hedging, which stays as part of the development. This is the adjacent property number 5. I was showing on the aerial photograph at the beginning. You can see a relatively new infill development for three dwellings in the rear of the adjacent villa. And this is the area to the front of the site. This is off Monk Bridge Road. You'll see the original access and stone walling and the mature trees, and this access is to be retained unaltered as part of the development. So moving on to some of the plans. This is the site layout plan. As I was saying, the access is off Monk Bridge Road to the front, accessing down past Albert House to the four dwellings at the rear, Albert House and Coach House retained, and the garden space for such within the blue line there. Some of the elevations. These the row of four terraces. As you can see, very traditional in character. Stone, natural stone is used with slate roofs. The chimney detail in projecting bays and sliding sash windows are some of the traditional features. So picking up the character of the wider conservation area. And this elevation, the rear elevation, bifold doors out onto the garden area, but again very traditional. And here you can see it's alongside the adjacent relatively new development on number 5. You can see sort of comparable scale of development to what's next door. Just the block plan on the site, it shows a little bit more detail than the original plan. This area here is original stone sets, which is going to be extended to form a courtyard, a stone set courtyard between all the properties, and this provides the car parking for the new properties. You can see each property has usable generous gardens to the rear. In terms of the neighbouring properties, the closest properties are the ones here at number 26 and 28, Moor Park Villas, and the separation to which to the rear elevations is approximately 21 metres to the rear elevation of the and about 17.5 metres to the rear elevation of this is a conservatory there. So that does exceed the required 12 metres of the house neighbours for living guide. And to the rear at Sandfield Garth, the separation is 23 metres, again exceeding the 21 metres of the design guide, to ensure that overshadowing, dominance and overlooking issues are not an issue. As members saw on site earlier, there's a similar development from the same developer just around the corner, which gives a very similar house type. These are semi-detached, and they do have dormer windows to the front elevation, which aren't on the proposed plan. But as members saw on site visit, it's felt to be a good quality development, which sits nicely within the conservation area. Really good stone detail into the properties, appropriate for the conservation area, and the stone sets which extended the original ones, similar to what we were proposing. On this development, really sort of helps to sort of set it within that heritage setting. Just another photograph again, just showing it. Let's say that these dormer windows aren't on the proposal, and it is a row of 4, but they are very similar in style.
So, in conclusion, I think the development creates 4 new dwellings in a sustainable location, which is compliant with policy H2 of the core strategy. And this, of course, weighs in favour of the development. However, members need to weigh this up against all the other material planning issues. And in this regard, it is considered that there are perhaps 2 principal issues for consideration. Firstly, is the layout, design, scale and use of materials of development acceptable, preserving the character of both Albert House and the wider conservation area? policies P10, P11, and the Far Henley Conservation Area appraisal of the relevant policies in this regard. And secondly, does the development have an acceptable impact on the amenity of the occupants of neighbouring properties? I think particularly the occupants of nearby properties on Moor Park Villas and Sandfield Garth, and policies GP5 of the UDP and the Neighbourhoods for Living design guide are the most relevant policies in this regard. And with that, I'll pass back to you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We have got Darren Robinson to speak on the objection and the Daniel. Yeah. Yes. Darren, you've got 4 minutes to address the committee.
Thank you. Good afternoon, members of the panel. I'm here speaking as a long-term resident of Moor Park Villas and on behalf of those who object to this development. We believe this proposal should be refused or at the very least reconsidered for the following reasons. We have concerns about overdevelopment and the environment. The proposal is disproportionate given the size of the specific area for development to the rear of Albert House. The report of the Chief Planning Officer references the Council's core strategy policy P10. We also wish to reference said policy on page 103. It lists key principles that should be accorded when supporting a proposal. For example, principle point 1, the size, scale and design layout of the development is appropriate to its context. It's difficult to understand how this proposal is not classed as overdevelopment given the tight boundaries so close to existing homes and the imposing nature of 4 9.5 metre high houses that will be within view of a number of neighbouring properties. Not to mention recent planning permission granted to extend Albert House to build a swimming pool. We understand no individual has the right to a view. However, all homeowners do have the right to be able to enjoy their properties, and the imposing and dominant nature of this development would absolutely infringe upon that given its size, visual impact and nature. Lots of green open spaces are concerned in an already densely populated area part of Leeds, and the consequence of this will have on declining wildlife, and we believe will continue to decline as a result. We also have concerns about the safety of local residents and motorists. We're concerned that the narrow entrance, when used by more vehicles, will make the blind bend on Monkbridge Road even more dangerous, causing accidents such as the recent part demolition of the stone wall next to the proposed entrance at Albert House. Vehicles waiting to gain access to the site could create a queue during busy periods, potentially an accident waiting to happen for speeding motorists around a blind bend. Vehicles using this entrance will be made up of up to 8 owned by the residents of the new development, plus additional vehicles owned by residents from the main Victorian Villa Albert House, Langton Construction and Lettings vehicles, Coach House residents and visitors. We're also concerned that for pedestrians who pass the entrance on their way to and from school, often with pushchairs and or young children, particularly during bin collection days. Bins have frequently created a narrower pathway on this dangerous part of Monkbridge Road. We also wish to reiterate that Alex Sobel MP, a local resident in the proposed development area, objects to the development, in addition to numerous neighbouring homeowners. The strength of feeling against this proposal is strong. Increasing the number of vehicles within such a small space is not in keeping with the Leeds City Council's desire for a low-carbon economy. We would argue that no final decision should be forthcoming today given the absence of certain important information, including the Biodiversity Net Gain Plan. I wish to finish by reading out comments published by the Conservation team, which appear to be concerned with much more than materials to be used, as commented on in point 9 of the report of the Chief Officer. The Conservation team comments. The proposed houses are within the curtilage of a 19th century villa, which is a positive feature of the Far Henley Conservation Area. The relationship of the new houses to the villa would be awkward, neither sitting comfortably within the setting of the villa, integrated with the existing outbuildings, nor assimilating into the surrounding suburban development. A different approach to the design, which linked to the houses to the existing coach house and was subordinate in mass with a reduced plan depth and height, could preserve the conservation area. In summary, members of the panel, we believe this proposal is incredibly unsympathetic to existing residents and Albert House and should be declined or at the very least reconsidered. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Does members have any question for Darren? No? Okay. Mr. London. Yeah. Sorry, there members haven't have any questions, so we will discuss it further on with officers and what other issues we will raise. So if you please go back where you were saying. Yes, please.
Thank you.
No, if you switch it off. Thank you. We now have William Lunton to speak in favor of the application. William. William, you've got 4 minutes to present it. If you could press the button inside, Brown.
First, I'd like to thank Lawrence Hill for his time considering this application and his positive engagement in the process. As you'll know, the site has a previous approval for 9 units, which was approved and then extended, and the site is recognised under the Leeds Council site allocation plan for a further 9 units. We believe this application is a more considered approach for the site. It retains Albert House as one single unit with adequate amenity space on the land to the west of Albert House, which catches the afternoon sun perfectly and can be accessed from one of the principal reception rooms. We feel this application is proportionate in scale for the site. A development of 9 units would require a substantial increase in parking provision and the loss of trees on the site, which would cause harm to the conservation area. This application requires the removal of no trees and does not change the front aspect of Albert House. The development received positive pre-application advice, and through the process we've engaged positively with the council to reach what we feel is the best outcome for the site. The planning officer has recommended the application for approval. We feel that we're responding to the climate crisis by constructing using highly insulated SIPS panels, and we've just completed our first air source heat pump dwellings, and we intend to use the same technology on this site. We're happy to accept a condition conditioning us to not use gas on the site whatsoever. We believe passionately in brownfield and infill planning permissions. Over the last few years, this committee or your officers under delegated powers have granted us the following infill and brownfield permission. Elton Lodge, 24 units, Broad Lane, 8 units, Cockcroft House, 16 units, Coach House, 1 unit, Micklefield Lodge, 6 units, Sandfield House, 13 units, Willow House, 13 units, and last but not least, Back Heathfield Terrace, which I understand you saw this morning, 5 units. This is 89 properties which Leeds needed. Now, I'd like you to consider the effect of 86 new build houses on one of the many greenfield sites on the outskirts of Leeds. Not only is there a loss of greenfield land, but these developments continue to foster a car culture. People in these new greenfield developments default to the car for shopping, going out, and childcare. All of the infill and brownfield developments above, and the one you are considering today, you can walk to local shops and amenities. You can walk to a nursery or primary schools. If these 86 units save 3 two-way car journeys per dwelling per day over the next 20 years, these planning permissions will have saved over 1,883,400 car journeys. I appreciate no one wants development in their local community, but this application is policy compliant. It meets the guidelines in Neighbourhood for Living and the Street Design Guide. The council's own guidance and their pre-application advice was considered from the outset, from the very moment the development was considered. As a local builder, the construction of these houses is a shot in the arm for the local economy. Keith and Pete, bricklayers from Cross Green, Daz the tiler from Rawdon, Danny the plumber from Guiseley, Gary the roofer from Armley. The SIPS panels come from Skipton and the stone from Calder Masonry, our most local natural stone quarry in Tingley. We're simple to work for and we pay better than large builders. We must think about the future occupiers of these properties. Looking back on previous developments, it was rewarding to sell a house to Charlie, a single mum who hadn't had a chance to get on the housing ladder near her son's school before we built our development. When Caroline and Jonathan were looking to downsize, they'd nearly given up when they found one of our houses, and this freed up a larger house for a growing family. Today, approval of this well-considered application will reduce overall car use compared to greenfield developments, will provide the Charlies, Jonathans and Carolines the houses they need to unlock other properties and give the market in Leeds the liquidity it needs as a forward-thinking, vibrant city.
Thank you, Darren. Well done. Are there any, sorry, why do I call it Darren? Sorry, William. Are there any questions for William? Councillor Walsh?
Thanks, Chair. Did I hear right? There's no gas on site at all?
So I'd be happy to accept. I'd be happy to accept a condition that conditions us to not using any gas in the new build properties. We've just successfully done a development with air source heat pumps and underfloor heating. While the capital cost is higher, it sells well to future occupiers, and there's no large scale builders like Barratt or Permissive Homes or anyone else that are using air source heat pumps, etc., on developments of this sort of scale and at this price point. So we feel like it's a really unique proposition, and for us, it's something that I genuinely believe in. And the combination with that and the SIPS panels results in an incredibly high EPC rating, which is something that I do think more and more people are starting to look at, particularly with the price of gas and electric.
Clarify that the report does talk about the air source heat pump, so it was part.
Do members have any question to officer? Councillor Campbell?
Can I just ask a quick one? A couple of us who were on the site visit remembered we've been to see this property on several occasions. Are we assuming that all the existing but perhaps not started planning permissions will drop?
The redevelopment application which we referred to on the site, that's lapsed. That was approved back in 2011, so that has now lapsed. The approval for the swimming pool, which members considered, is still live. So in theory, that could be implemented. It wouldn't impact on this development because it's in another part of the site and it's an extension to Albert House. But so there's nothing within this application which would prevent that's happening, but that application will be lapsing in the next year or so.
Any other? Councillor Anderson?
I talked about this on site visit this morning. Paragraph 23, neighbourhood plan. It says Far Headingley, West Park, Wheatwood design statement, and I personally can't see any other reference to anything in the report thereafter. So what does that paragraph 20, what does that say about this type of development in the
that's the design statement for the area. It's not the neighbour plan. So it just talks about, it picks up on the Far Headingley conservation appraisal, sort of picks up on those points, but it talks about the importance of green spaces and maintaining those and for development to respect and respond to local character. So it doesn't as we've discussed on site, it doesn't prevent backland development, but it ensures that if we are looking to develop these areas of green space or large gardens, it needs to be reflected and reflect the character of the area. So it provides, as I say, it reflects the conservation area appraisal where these areas do form an important part of the character of the conservation area and the wider Far Headingley area.
So it doesn't make any specific reference to this area as being suitable for X or Y type of development, and we would support development of this. We would object to development for that. Does it go into that level of detail? No, it doesn't.
It talks about it's more broad brush in terms of it talks about the as I say, the design guide and what we're looking to preserve, as opposed to actually allocating or directing development to certain sites. So that's what it says. So.
No? Should we go on to comments? Anyone want to comment? The only comment that I had when I first see this application, I was cautious of the entrance and the trees, but with no trees moving and the entrance going to remain, I'm quite personally happy with the application for that. But that was my main concern when I first saw the application, thinking there'll be trees disappear and things, but there'll be no trees. Councillor Walsh.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I agree with your comments about the access arrangements. I think that that's perfectly reasonable. I mean, this is an area I know very well because back in the day when we could actually afford a community planner, we did a lot of work on some of the documents that Barry's mentioned. And to my mind, this development is, to kind of phrase from the applicant's presentation, well considered. I think it is in accord with those general design documents. And I think it fits in well. It's an area that I know well, Chair. I've knocked on many doors in this area, as you might imagine. And I do think it actually does fit in quite well with the area. It's just, so we have a familiarity with it, Councillor Reagan, yes. Anyway, but what I particularly like about it is the approach to carbon and then climate. I think it's encouraging to see small scale developers looking towards SIPs, looking towards air source heat pumps, and I think a no gas condition will be an excellent start. I think it's a development that enables us to put down yet another marker in Leeds that we're serious about climate emergency. And that's, I think, that tips the scales for me, Chair. So at an appropriate juncture, I'd be prepared to move the recommendations.
Totally agree, Councillor Walsh. That's the start forward from Leeds with environment. So Councillor Walsh proposed to move, and it's been second. Where do I go from here now? So it's moving second. So all those in favour of the application?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Those against? Those that abstaining?
Councillor Anderson, Chair. Just a question, Councillor Anderson.
Sorry? Councillor Anderson, I says earlier, this meeting going to be a vibrant committee. So I'm always smiling and I expect my members to smile and do the right thing. Are you in favour, against, or abstaining? Okay. Councillor Smith, what are you doing? Oh, sorry, I didn't see you voted. Thank you.
Just quickly.
So, Steve?
Chair, just then for clarity, the motion is being carried to approve the application, grant subject to the conditions that are listed on page 19 to 20, plus with an additional condition to encompass the no gas and the provision of the heat ground source heat pumps. Thank you, Chair.
So, what was it called now? This has been carried. Thank you. We will now move to item 8, and Nikki has removed herself. I've got some, thank you. While we are changing over item 8, this is a pre-app application from Cottingley Field. So as soon as the officer takes his seat.
Always a good plan, isn't it?
Okay, we move straight and excuse me, we're ready to move on to item 8. Can I hand over to the officer?
Thank you, Chair. I'm Richard Smith, Principal Planning Officer in the South and West team. As Toby's put the slide on there, I'm going to do a very, very brief quick run through, but it is ultimately the applicant's presentation. So with that in mind, I just want to set the context briefly. The application, which is made by the applicants Fuller and Forbes Healthcare, this is a pre-application inquiry, and there's also some commentary to be provided by ward member Scopes. Essentially, this is a pre-application inquiry on 2 sites for your consideration today, and this is to replace the existing GP surgery at Cottingley, which has been which has been deemed no longer fit for purpose by the CQC, and we are up against it in terms of their time frame at that building. For that reason, we're looking at these 2 different sites with 2 different characteristics. The proposal amounts to approximately 2,400 square metres of healthcare, principally for Cottingley residents, but there will be potentially further residents expected from neighbouring South East communities. And that's for the following reasons. The GP centre will consist of both medical facilities, but it will also provide other hospital services for outpatients in the surrounding areas. There will also be community health services, a primary network space for physios and mental health practitioners. There'll also be potentially a cafe and a pharmacy as well. Although in the case of site number 2, as we will come on to, the cafe may very well remain within the existing precinct, shopping precinct adjacent, where there is an existing pharmacy business. In addition, the facility may look to provide rooms for other similar bodies and stakeholders and charities to operate some services from the centre, and these might be financial or housing support services, something which the applicants are very keen to promote in the interests of the Cottingley community. The 2 sites themselves then, on the presentation in front of you, you've got option 1 down on the Ring Road side. And you've also got there option 2, which is in the Cottingley Vale estate area, quite near to the existing shopping precinct itself. Just quickly, the option 1 site is green space. It's an existing area of green space, approximately 0.6 of a hectare. Access is taken off the Ring Road. So option 2 site is actually in the main urban area. Potentially, this would be entirely held within the main urban area, but there may be some possibility, depending on parking surveys, where we might look towards some of the existing surrounding green space for extra parking, but that's certainly a question mark only at this stage. There are some consistent and also very different material considerations that characterise the 2 sites and developments, which are captured in the report. Without repeating those all in detail, the key issues I want to highlight today are as follows. The provision of the healthcare facility locationally in respect of core strategy policy P9, community services, in particular, which considers new community facilities being accessible by foot, cycling and public transport. The relationship and links to existing shopping and community facilities in the area, again, going back to policy P9. We also need to consider carefully the highway considerations, both particularly the access to site 1 and also the parking considerations around site 2, where there's less opportunities to create new additional parking courts. This may involve potentially some further infill parking, therefore, at site 2. Some amenity considerations to both sites and their respective adjoining land uses. Site 1, as you will note, is next to the cemetery, the crematorium. So therefore, there are some issues around potentially noise, and part of site 1 does offer the opportunity to potentially develop a multi-use games area. Potentially on that site, it may be best placed elsewhere given the closeness of the crematorium from an amenity perspective. And then also in terms of site 2, it's also very near the residential accommodation in terms of the twin tower blocks and the surrounding estate. There are also mature trees on both sites actually, or certainly adjacent to site number 1 on that line, the Ring Road, and also in the corner near to the Dolphin Court sheltered housing complex at site 2. There's an element of flood risk that does exist to site 1 in terms of the access being just set within flood zones 2 and 3. But that's the only other issue I really want to focus on. Just got a very, very brief update, Chair, in terms of the report, particularly just really in terms of site 2. Highways have now commented on site 2. They've raised sort of 4 key principal issues. One is parking demand for the proposals would need to be very carefully understood. And that would be potentially through detailed parking surveys, as well as obviously further clarification around staff and consulting room numbers. Number 3 is the developer needs to pay for some traffic regulation orders potentially if it was deemed that we would need to provide further restrictions in terms of on-street parking in the area of site 2. And then lastly, alterations to existing bus stop would require consultation with West Yorkshire Combined Authority if the bus stop was to move as part of site 2's development. Very briefly, flood risk management, they've outlined there's a foul and surface water drain sewer that just touches into the site at the back of the shopping precincts. Therefore, consultation with Yorkshire Water would be expected. And also, lastly, local plans and policy who have commented against site 2. They essentially say that the land's not designated allocated in the local plan as per the report. It's brownfield land, main urban area, set within a regeneration area. So in principle, they support this site under the location of development, the regeneration priority programme area it sits within, and the community facilities and other services policy P9. The site, like site number 1, site 2 does include trees and existing areas of parking, both which require careful consideration, they say. Lastly, they also say there's potential to share some residential and healthcare parking, and site 2 would allow for potential wider regeneration opportunities of this area, particularly in exploring the ways in which we can rebuild or regenerate the existing 1970s neighbourhood shopping parade, the shopping precincts adjacent to site 2. Therefore, Chair, I'll hand over to the applicants to do their presentation and obviously take questions as and when.
Thank you. Could I invite Mark and Rich to the table? Thank you. You've got 10 minutes between you two. Thanks.
Once you're done, can you turn it off again just because the camera follows it?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Mark Fuller, and I'm one of the owners of the Fuller and Forbes Healthcare Group. Cottingley Surgery is one of 9 surgeries that I run. I have a patient population of 62,000 patients. Cottingley Surgery has 2,000 patients. It was last inspected by the CQC health regulator in 2018, who found several parts of the facility were not healthcare compliant. Suggested in the CQC report that we should consider either improving them or moving as a matter of urgency, as the practice would be considered unsafe for the provision of healthcare. So we then developed a plan to move to the Fullerton site next to Ellen Road and had planning approval working with the council to move the GP surgery to this site. That site was abandoned about 18 months ago. So we started again to try to relocate the site and have come up with, as Richard noted before in the presentation, 2 options, one next to dual carriageway and the other option next to in the centre of Cottingley. The reason for obviously redeveloping the primary care medical centre is to improve the healthcare facilities for staff and patients alike and to make sure that it's CQC compliant, but also to create a one-stop shop where you have several different medical services positioned in the same building. So that would be the hospital, the community, Leeds City Council services wrapping around a holistic approach to patient care. I've done this same design in Newcastle, Burnley and Devon, and it's worked very well to create a one-stop shop for patients. I've had conversations already with the hospital who are interested in using space for outpatients diagnostics, Leeds Community Healthcare interested in using space, and local pharmacy provision within the building itself. Any Leeds City Council space provided through financial housing services would be provided free within the building, because a lot of patients in that sort of demographic encounter social issues that present later on as medical issues. So being able to treat them in the same building with local authority services would be very helpful.
Thank you. So my name is Richard Berry, architect working on behalf of the medical centre. So we've prepared a couple of slides here. Let me just see if the controller Works, yeah, okay. So I gather members have been on a site visit this morning, so hopefully have refreshed themselves on the area, but just as a very brief overview, you can see the Cottingley estate located around 2.5 miles from the city centre, just below the M621. Just zoom in a little bit more. So you can see the location of the existing GP surgery there identified in the yellow, and the boundary of the Cottingley estate in the red, bordered by the railway line, the motorway and the ring road. Just a brief overview of the current medical centre. So as been mentioned, it's not compliant with current NHS standards. It's small in capacity with only 2 clinical rooms, lacks facilities such as clean and dirty utility rooms, patient interview rooms, staff facilities. It's got poor accessibility. There's no disabled parking on site. So the implications are a lot of residents in the area don't use this centre and kind of go wider afield, which isn't really an ideal situation. So then, as Mark's mentioned, the aspiration is to put a one-stop medical facility on the site. We've included a plan there of the Old Woodley Centre, just to give you an idea, and it might be one members are familiar with in terms of scale and type of facility. So sort of the traditional GP medical centre at the bottom of the building, NHS facilities on upper floors, and then supported by council and sort of other healthcare related facilities. As part of this process, a number of sites have been considered in conjunction with the council officers. The 2 sites the planning officer mentioned are the ones that have been taken forward, seen as the sort of most appropriate out of the ones considered. So looking at site 1, again, the planning officer kind of been through this, but adjacent to the ring road, at the edge of the playing fields, some aerial views of the site there. And what we've also done is provided some indicative layouts. I mean, we're looking at principles here in terms of kind of which sites, which location, but just to help give an idea of scale and context. The medical centre located at the northwest of the site, adjacent to the ring road, so giving it a bit of prominence. Parking located beneath, but retaining the tree belt that's there. And in appreciating in doing this, it does remove some of the sporting aspects of the site. So trying to mitigate that, putting a multi-use games area on it. The location could differ if needs be, as a planning officer has mentioned, and maybe things like outdoor gym equipment and paths that could route through the site. A sketch through there just to sort of, again, just give a bit of indication of how it could look, how it could be developed. Then the second option considered is the one more sort of in the Cottingley centre. So at the moment, that's areas of footpaths, some landscaping and car parking, and adjacent to the current shopping centre. Again, it's been mentioned, is the capacity for more parking in this area, given if the medical centre would bring its own need for parking. So this just identifies some areas where additional parking could go within the sort of current area. So the red area kind of locates areas that would be fairly easy to locate additional parking within. As part of this, again, with council officers, we've been discussing the context of how this going to interact with the adjacent shopping centre. So constructed in the 70s, in the sort of last decade, 15 years, part of it has been demolished. So you're left with a centre that really doesn't function that well or work as well in sort of contemporary times, not very welcoming. It's got an indoor aspect, as this photo shows. So as part of this redevelopment, this next slide shows an indication of how it could work. Perhaps the shopping centre could be renovated as part of that, maybe remove the indoor element and move the shopping area to the facade of the building to try and make it a bit more interactive. Between the medical centre and the shopping centre, we could create kind of like a village square almost feel, on axis with the primary school, which is again one of the aspect residents have quite like that. The primary school has that visibility, so trying to reinforce that. You can see where we've created the parking, so making better use of the parking that exists in that area. And then the final one we've got, and again, this is just showing you an indication, but how this could be developed. So sort of a 2-3 story medical facility, the shopping centre to the right of the screen, trying to make that appear a bit more welcoming. And it could be, if that is considered suitable for regeneration, the pharmacy unit, for example, could go within that facility. Cafes could go from that facility and sort of spill out to the space between, and then again, as mentioned, the facility on access with the primary school. So trying to create that public space in between. That's an overview from myself at the mark. If you want to add any final comments, or no, so thank you. That's our presentation.
Lovely, thank you. Are there any, Councillor Campbell?
A couple of questions. The obvious one, of course, is can you upgrade? Why can't you upgrade the existing? That's part one. Do you want to answer that first?
So we've contemplated that, but just the structure of the current medical centre, it's built into the side of the church above, and I'm not able to extend and generate consultation rooms. At the moment, the actual medical facility only has 2 functioning consultation rooms. So you can have one nurse, you can have one GP, but you can't provide any more appointments. And its proximity just to the Cottingley Drive at the front means that it's going to be very difficult to extend the footprint of the building.
So what you're saying to us is we can't knock down the one we've got and build a new one on site. All right, okay, that's fine. And I've now got a complete blank about what the second question was. So bear with me and I might come back. Oh yes, I remembered. So do you actually own that building, or do you, because the obvious question then is what will happen to the building if you move out?
So the building at the moment is owned by the charity, which is located just above in Cottingley. And what we did do with the initial application to the council when I did the Fullerton site, and we would also do it in this one, is support the finances back to the charity so that we could use that building for peer support groups for the local community. It'll be like a wellbeing centre. So realising that I don't want to destabilise the charity that exists on the notional rent that it gets from the building from the NHS.
Any other question? No? Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Yeah. Do you have a preferred option in terms of, you know, which you would like to see come forward, option 1 or option 2, and why?
It's a difficult question. I did initially have a preferred option, which was next to the dual carriageway. And the reason for that was the financial envelope for the build would be very high. And one of the notional rents or the income generated to the practices from patients joining. So being close and or proximal to the dual carriageway where patients can see the medical centre helps the list size grow to support obviously the mortgage on the building. But I can also see the added benefit of redeveloping the centre of Cottingley for patients alike. My only reservation with the redevelopment of the centre is that if the hospital is as interested in Leeds community healthcare or as interested in positioning services there, is the inflow of traffic to the estate and just making sure that there's enough parking spaces to serve not just the primary care centre, but also serve the hospital and the community services, and not to mention Leeds City Council services. I don't want to populate Cottingley Estate with lots of cars travelling around in circles trying to find parking locations, which is why the original option was option 1 next to the dual carriageway, but there's obviously reservations about green space loss.
Thank you. Any other question? Thank you both. Councillor Scope, you've got also 10 minutes.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for letting me speak. Just in terms of introduction, my name is Andrew Scopes. I'm a councillor for the Beeston Holbeck ward, and Cottingley is within that ward. I'm going to let the others make the technical arguments around the building regulations. What I want to talk about is the human need for GP access in Cottingley and the importance of that. So, as you've already heard, Cottingley is like an island. So it's got the motorway on one side, it's got the railway on the other side, and the other two sides have major roads. And there's low car ownership, and the bus service isn't as good as any of us would like to see it. So the importance of a GBP practice being resident in Cottingley is massive for the health and well-being of Cottingley residents. And I think that's something I really want to focus on. And the other thing that's already been said is that the current surgery does not meet standards. I saw the picture up just a minute ago, and it looks like a big building, which is where I guess Colin's question came from. But ultimately, that's a Cottingley Community Centre, which is managed by a charity, and they've only got 2 rooms downstairs. And frankly, it's not good enough for Cottingley residents, and that is why some of them don't use the Cottingley GP surgery, in my view. The risk of losing the GP from the estate, I think, is real and is a material risk for the health and well-being of my residents. I think the other thing that's really important to just highlight about Cottingley, so it's an area it is a high deprivation. I don't like using statistical terms to refer to people, but that's the language of, I guess, of planning and the council. So we need to recognise that a lot of our residents do have a lot of needs. And when we hear about the ideas about having free access for council services like housing options, like debt advice options, which do eventually, and we all know they do, lead to health issues, we've got to see that as a real opportunity for Cottingley. A larger practice also, I think, would ensure that Cottingley retains its practice. So if we have other people coming in to Cottingley to get their medical needs met, I can only see that as a good thing, and perhaps making Cottingley more of a centre, like a local centre, rather than somewhere that, and as a destination, wouldn't be bad for Cottingley at all. It would improve the service. I think that is undeniable if you look at the plans versus what's there currently. I don't know if it's good or bad. They didn't show you a picture of the inside of the current surgery. So that's really important. I guess I'd also just like to say my preference is for option 2. I think that's particularly strong in terms of its merits. It's in the middle of Cottingley. It's near the current pharmacy. Doing something radical in that centre, if we can package that up with the new GP surgery, we're really good for the area. The picture at the end where the whole area is redesigned more like a local centre, I think is fantastic. I think the other thing that's important to note is it's right next to Dulverton Court, which is sheltered accommodation. So having a GP as your next door building, if you live in sheltered accommodation, I think that would be very well received. I think in terms of the parking, I think we've got to recognise the importance of green space in any area, but we've got to balance that with the need for a GP centre. And I think particularly in option 2, you can see a small loss of grass space for additional parking for a really, really material benefit. In my view, it's very easy to justify. So just in closing, I want to be absolutely clear to the panel that I'm asking for your full support for this and asking officers to find pragmatic solutions to the challenges such as parking, and recognise that there may be some loss in terms of small amounts of green space, but we've got to push through that and find pragmatic solutions for a new GP practice in Cottingley. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Scope. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you. I think those of us who were on site this morning and listening to the two people before you, I think we understand effectively we understand the need for a new surgery. So we understand the principle. And I don't think any of us are saying we wouldn't agree to that. I think there are 2 elements, though. As you say, you are going to, whichever site you choose, you're going to lose some green space. And there isn't a lot of green space in Cottingley. So losing any is something you really want to avoid. One of the things we we looked at on site was the somewhat grandly named Cottingley Centre, which perhaps has seen better days. And I wondered if you and the other ward members, given the City Council's ownership of that site, have thought about perhaps talking to the GP surgery about a larger scale redevelopment, which includes that particular site, because at the moment it doesn't seem to be functioning very well. And it would seem to me that if you could increase that, I suppose, that mass of destination points within it, it might actually make the whole of that particular area more vibrant. The cafe might be more effective. The pharmacy, obviously, it might link. There was a post office sign, so I assume there's a post office in there, and all those other elements. So I just wondered if you'd had that sort of discussion.
Thank you very much. I think those are very good questions. I think firstly, in terms of the location, as you saw from one of the slides, a number of sites was considered around Cottingley, and the two you got presented to are sort of the best two out of those sites. So trying to find a site has had a lot more thought than what you've seen today. In terms of the green space, yeah, I totally agree. We can always have more green space. We built a playground in Cottingley back in 2019, and that's been very well received because the play space is so important. In terms of the centre, as you'll see, it's sort of got this funny, if you've been there, it's got this funny flat roof with these sort of mini pyramids, which I think was trendy when it was built, but the practicalities of that have been pretty disastrous. So it leaks a lot. If we're honest, there's been antisocial behaviour of young people who climb on the roof. So whenever it's fixed, there's a foot that goes through some of it and it leaks again. If you've been inside the building, you will have seen, in fact, we saw a photo of it earlier on. It's, I don't think it's disparaging to call it dingy. That's the reality of the centre. My personal view is an option would be to relocate some of the shops into a slightly larger centre and use the centre as a car park, so flatten it and build parking space. That would be my personal view of the centre. I haven't spoken to anyone in Cottingley over my 4 and a bit years as a councillor who says we really want to retain the current centre, but I have had a lot of people saying you need to replace the roof, you need to knock it down, you need to build a new one. So I think there could be another vision other than the one that has been displayed today, where you have the centre one place and then the bit where the building isn't there anymore. I think the challenge around that would be funding. I think asking, finding who would fund that part of the project would have to be factored in. And again, I think this is where we need to work with the applicant and officers to find pragmatic solutions to how we can make this work. What I want to happen is sort of you guys to give authority or to give blessing to this idea of let's progress this, find something that's going to work, and then come back with a sort of a fleshed out argument. And one of those options, I think, is what you suggest, Colin, which seems like certainly a tangible option if the council were happy with that. I hope that answers. Thank you.
Any more questions? No? Thank you, Councillor Scope.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So obviously at the end of the report, we've got some questions for members. Questions, can members feedback their... Can... Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's regarding the district centre development. The council has got these list of wanting to know, is that included in it within the council to develop that area. And when I looked at it today, I can't believe that they've got a pharmacy sort of round at the back, out of the way, you know. So I just want to know, is that part of the council district plan to develop that site?
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question. It's actually, the shopping precinct is actually not part of a designated centre. It kind of functions and looks like an existing centre, and normally you'd expect it to be allocated as a centre in our local plan, but it's not. But I think off the back of this development, policy colleagues have definitely said that off the back of option 2, it would be probably redesignated as a centre. But at the moment, it's just a very small shopping parade or precinct. It does have units in there. It has the Cottingley pharmacy, as you've mentioned, with the post office within. So that's quite an important thing to remember. It also has a newsagents, and it also has an off license. There's also a small little cafe as well. So the units are quite well taken up, but they are potentially not. They certainly seen better days. And I think working with commercial asset management, the view is that there's no reason why, off the back of this development, we couldn't look to refurbish, reevaluate how we, showcase those particular units. And perhaps there might be a redevelopment of the internal precinct area into a sort of more external facing area of shop units. So I think the view is that, we want to retain the pharmacy business at all costs, particularly because obviously it serves such an important function to the residents. If we could do that as part of a redeveloped centre, and then it's designated as a centre, then that's probably the way I see it go forward.
Councillor Campbell, did you want to ask a question?
Well, I do. Can I ask a question? That I think there needs to be some small discussion around that, if you don't mind me saying so. Could the highway officers tell us effectively what you told us on site this morning in relation to proposed highway works and how they would affect site 1?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. So option 1, the reason that it's highways have reservation on it is because the junction will need to be set back so much because of the proposed highway works on the A6 110, which is currently at advanced public consultation stage. And that there's going to be a bus lane and then a two-way cycle track after that. And then what would that mean is the junction will have to be set back, and to measure the visibility from that junction to looking to your right on the dual carriageway, that visibility line would be behind these very mature trees. So you don't have visibility, and the junction will also interfere with the bus stop there, which is a very high frequency bus stop. I'm looking at every 10-15 minutes bus services. So there'll be a lot of elements that need to be considered. The access that they've shown on their indicative access for option 1 is about only 60 meters away from the signalized junction. So that is very close, and we can see that because it's a very busy corridor, we can see that queuing and blocking their site access all the way back to their site, which is again, we can see that creating highway safety issues further down the line when we look at detailed design stuff. And that's why our preference is option 2, subject to parking surveys and the TROs that we talked about and are needed.
With respect, Chair, would it just be easier if we said now that we would not accept a development on site 1 for the reasons that have just been indicated? 2, it's designated green space. 3, it just doesn't tick any boxes. And if we just simply said no now, that solves that problem. And then we can go on to discuss 2, which in my opinion has potential. Can I suggest that?
I totally agree with you, Councillor Campbell. That was something that thought of. Yeah, we'll go that in a minute. Councillor Smith, did you want?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I was just going to say that even reading the papers, I sadly didn't make the site visit this morning, but even reading the papers, it's quite obvious that option 1 isn't a credible option, and that we need to ensure that we try our best for option 2, and use that as an opportunity to redevelop as much of the area as we can to make it a fit for purpose, future-proofed area for these residents who have always been marooned, to want of a better word. As it's been mentioned, there's low car ownership, so they rely on public transport. So if they've got everything they need in that area, it's going to make their life a lot easier. It will help the climate emergency, and if we can somehow still develop the green space that was going to be done for option 1, and give the area the mugger, give the area the trim trail, you know, and really, you know, help these residents in a way of sort of social prescribing, so they probably won't even need to use the area, the health centre as much as they possibly do now. Thank you.
Really agree. Yeah.
I don't know whether Richard wants to do this, but just for clarification, that actually option 2 doesn't include the mugger. The mugger was obviously because it was, yeah.
Says you could do it in option 1. Totally agree with you, Councillor Smith. But before we go further, could you please lay out the comments?
Okay, so question 1, can members feedback their considerations of planning balance to both sites 1 and 2 on the following key issues? So the first is the location and the land use designation, including the position with adjoining land uses. So in terms of site 1, we need to consider carefully the fact that it's obviously, as Councillor Campbell said, it's green space next door to the crematorium, the ring roads and mature trees. And obviously the location in terms of topography at the bottom of Cottingley Estate. In terms of number 2, site number 2,
Chair, no, Chair, sorry. I thought we'd said quite clearly, we're not having anything to do with
we already said that.
Yeah.
We're not having
Okay,
anything,
fine.
but I think
We
you
don't
just
need to do that.
Yeah, so if you
leave site 1 altogether.
Leave site
Okay,
1
fine,
off.
fine. So in terms of site 2, can we consider the location, land use designation, juxtaposition of adjoining land uses, the potential for suggested additional improvements, namely as part of any development? So in terms of site 2, that's the built environment, the neighbouring shopping precincts. Can you be clear about any sort of visions that you have in terms of that shopping precinct, whether it's partial demolition, complete demolition, or just some remodelling? And then question C is the highway safety efficiency of the design in relation to parking and sustainable transport. That's obviously the bus service that runs through the Cottingley Vale estate. And D was any clear indications of your expectation in terms of the landscape arrangements for both the existing and proposed up at Cottingley Vale.
Right. Yeah, the reason why all these questions read out, we have it written down before it was decided. So, Councillor Hamilton, I'm going to do it in order as I have the hand raised. It was Councillor Campbell first, then Reagan, and then you.
Can I just say, Chair, one of the things I said on site was to Mr. Butler was, I think this needs a bit more work. So I'm actually not happy to answer any of those questions at the moment, but I will give you a broad outline of having been there and had a look at it and listened to what everybody said, what I think I would like officers and the developer to look at. So number 1, we accept that there's a need for a new provision. Okay. We accept that probably the only site is site 2. We accept also that that will be detrimental to the green space around that. And 3, we accept that currently on site there's car parking, garages, and a small shopping precinct. You see, as I said earlier, it seems to me there is potential in that area for if we want to think outside the simple box of either do we just plant a health centre there or there, about saying how can we use that development to improve the shopping facilities, because the people who live round about need that. And it seems to me that there's scope for the developer and the city council, and if the city council are really enthusiastic about developing the area, they would step up to do something on that site which allows us not to end up with a bright spanking new health centre and a, quite frankly, grotty, scruffy council-owned bit next to it. Rather, we could have a proper combined development in that particular area, which would produce services which would help the GP surgery, but it would also help everybody else because the shopping facilities will be there, the off license will be there, etc., etc. So that's what I say. I think it needs some more work, and it needs discussions between the developer, the city council, and in particular the ward members about how you achieve that, because that's really what we'd like to see happen.
Agree. It's all about the community. And say, Councillor Reagan.
I think my understanding of this is that it's clear we all feel that it needs to be option 2. Yeah. And it's clear from my understanding and working in the area and knowing the area really, really well and looking at what we've got in the perceptions of the regional centre and how we're developing those types of multi-use one-stop facilities in all our neighbourhoods. That's what needs to be here in Cottingley. But I think there needs to be some more discussions between also the retail owners and the retail units to see if there is any space within that medical centre area to go into there, because it's clear from what we heard from Councillor Scopes is that the idea of having extra parking would be on the original shopping precinct area. So that's my view.
Councillor Hamilton. No, I think Councillor Campbell said what I was going to say. Could the council, because the council own that, work with the health service, the developers to do it all in one instead of, like Colin said, having a nice new building and then that's all scrubby. So that's what I was going to say, but Colin has put it across already. And also we definitely need to look at the parking, which, you know, and to try and make sure whatever bring up the green space is there and no trees is removed. Okay, I totally agree with all 3 comments that communication now between the council and the developers to come to some structure alongside the councillors there to really put things in place. Councillor Reagan is quite right to mention regional centre in my ward. That came from nowhere. It was like a pub wasteland and it was a big fight. And now it's the #1 centre in Leeds around the community. And I'm sure
aged really well.
Yeah, it works. And I'm sure we could do something like that for Cottingley. It's all about the community. We want the best for Leeds and the best for the community wherever it plays. Councillor Walshaw.
Yep, thanks, Chair. I'm very much in accord up to a point with everything that's been said so far. The only thing I would caution colleagues is to go back to what Councillor Scope said, that we can't let perfect be the enemy of good here. My only concern with a fantastic all-in-one development is, does that unduly delay the medical facilities and does that put GP provision in the area at risk? Because the applicant has effectively a good to go solution, my understanding of the application. Now, without wanting to cast undue aspersions on other council colleagues, bringing in the likes of asset management and regeneration, and I note Mr. Butler's expression, may somewhat, in some circumstances, delay projects a little. I'm being very diplomatic. So my caution is the timeline, Chair, that's all. I think colleagues have had some excellent suggestions. I think Councillor Scope's comments about being a pragmatic solution to providing both green space and sensible, adequate amount of parking is right. But the goal is the medical and wellbeing centre after all. And that's all. We have some experience in this, Chair, going back, we're having delays to projects. And I wouldn't want to see that happen here for the people of Cottingley. That's all.
So, yeah, I smile because Councillor Walshaw has actually articulated precisely what I was thinking at that particular point. I mean, I don't think it stops us from potentially engaging because it's a pre-app, remember. And actually, what Councillor Campbell said as well was very eloquent in that, although he said that he didn't really want to comment on it, actually he's answered pretty much all the questions that we were asking, to be honest with you. So what I've captured here, and I think Richard's probably got more than me, but I think to summarise, obviously, it is a pre-app, so there are much more further discussions to go on and much more detail to actually tease out of the applicant. But it's quite clear we accept the need for the provision in the area, fully behind that. Site 2 is the option that we prefer to take forward. We potentially are accepting the use of the green space if required for additional parking, although in car park policy terms, we don't necessarily need it, but we need to make sure that we don't displace any of the existing car parking whilst we're there. Yes, perhaps we need to pursue and be aspirational about the scope for the developer and the City Council's asset management team to have a discussion about the comprehensive redevelopment, but mindful there may be some difficulties there because not the least, obviously at the end of the day, doctor surgeries are businesses, and whether Dr. Fuller would want to then have the responsibility of managing shop units as well as his surgery practice is possibly a question that he would need to answer in the discussions, but we can pursue that and hopefully it won't delay it too long. But being truthfully honest about it, I suspect the answer to that may create the difficulties that Councillor Walshaw mentioned. And then, just in summary, from what Councillor Smith said, and obviously we can have further discussion about securing any other potential benefits. But I think that may just be a bit of a wish list, but there's no reason why we can't discuss it is a pre-app. So I think that answers the questions, Richard, and we know that the direction for members. Is that okay?
Yes, fine.
Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, and I just think the developers are ready to go. So it's just up to the council now to get their skates on and work together to get moving fast. Okay, agree with that, Steve? Yeah?
That's great. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone, should we make a start? Okay, we'll go straight on to item 9, former Leeds School Golf Course, Gypsy Lane. Can I hand over directly to the officer to present this? Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Just waiting for the screen to. There we go. So this is a proposal for a new 3G pitch and tennis courts and associated fencing up to 4 meters high, 4.5 meters high. Just in terms of some updates, if I may, I've received comments from Councillor Dixon requesting that it be noted that Friends of Middleton Park have made a representation and that should have been recorded in the covering statement. That was my omission. I do apologise for that, but the salient points in their representation are covered in the report. And going forward, those comments will be duly noted in any future application which comes forward for determination. I've also received a representation from a local resident who runs a hedgehog rescue facility, and she's requested that members are made aware that the site which is under consideration is an agreed released site for those hedgehogs, and that is something that we will look into, as I say, when we come forward for final determination. So that's the kind of update in terms of those representations. So as I say, this is a proposal for a 3G pitch and tennis courts and fencing on land forming part of the former South Leeds golf course. The site itself is situated to the immediate south of Coburn Academy. Although the application has been submitted by the council, ultimately it is understood that this will be run by the Coburn Academy Trust and used by its students, but will also be made available for community use outside of school hours. The requirement for the additional formal space follows a recent planning approval to expand the school for a 3-storey modular classroom block. Essentially, this expansion, together with the previous bulge cohorts, has placed additional pressure on existing formal outdoor play space. And it's understood that this is exacerbated during periods of wet weather where the existing 3G pitch remains in use, but grassed areas are not suitable due to waterlogging. The availability of existing indoor facilities is reduced further in December and March and in the summer exam series, which exacerbates the existing uses even further. So that's the context. And the applicant in their submission have also stated that to comply with DFE guidance for soft and outdoor PE space, based on the current numbers at the school, there is a deficit of 35.5% play space. So that's the context. So in terms of the geography then, and just turning to the slides, if I may. Okay. So the red line is the application site, situated to the south of Coburn School. The dotted line, the red line on the northern section of the boundary is a public right-of-way, public bridle way, which runs in an east to west direction. At the western side, it connects into Gypsy Lane, where there is an existing kennels and cattery, roughly in this location here. And then beyond that, further west is a residential development. In the eastern direction, the footpath connects into Middleton Woods, which is also ancient woodland, and also Middleton Woods Nature Reserve. To the immediate east, south and west of the site is the residual areas of the former golf course. And that's included in the blue line, which would be used to carry out some of the off-site planting, which I will mention later during the course of this presentation. One of the key distinctive features of the site is open nature and the tree lines that exist within it. There is also a considerable difference in levels. The western side of the site is more elevated than the east, and there is a fall approximately of about 8 meters across a 200-meter length of the application site at its widest point. So that's the kind of geography. A close-up kind of image, clearly out of date, but it does represent the golf course as was, with the red line boundary, application boundary annotated. And you can see there, just to the north is the area where the phase 1 expansion took place, the permission that I referred to at the outset. So just in terms of the site layout, the school is situated just to the north. I've described the footpath which runs along this northern boundary. There is an existing access which members who attended the site visit, we drove down this morning and parked towards the end of that drive, with an access then into the area just to the south, along a surfaced area, providing a ramped access then into the tennis courts, which would be positioned on this upper tier. And on the lower tier, the 3G rugby pitch and football pitch would be located. Around the courts themselves, as I mentioned in the introduction, is a 4.5 metre well mesh fence. And then around the boundary of the site along the red line in this area here, there would be a 2.4 metre well mesh secure boundary to provide a secure defensible line for the school. The magenta coloured dashed line would be the route of the proposed diverted footpath. So it would, from its existing point, run along this line here, wrap around the proposed facility, and then connect into Gypsy Lane in this location just here. So just in terms of the site sections, and this is not very clear, is it? It's difficult to see, actually, difficult to decipher. The top section is the view facing north. So the school is in the background. The red line represents the existing land level, if that is clear. And the dashed white lines, the top line relates to the line of the finish level of the tennis court. And the line below that, the dashed line, relates to the finish level of the proposed rugby pitch, football pitch. So there are areas where there are cutting and filling taking place, particularly on the western side. And then equally on the eastern flanks, the ground is then made up. So in reality, the tennis court and the part of the football pitch, rugby pitch, is set down into the landscape. And then on this end, on the eastern end of the site, it will be built up. So roughly about 3 meters of cut and then 3 meters of made up ground on the eastern side of the site. The section below is a view facing south, and I don't know if that's any clearer, but you can see where you've got the kind of white sections there. That is where the cutting takes place. And then where the green is above the line, that's where the land is made up. So that is a view facing south. The one below that would be a view from within the pitch, the football pitch, rugby pitch, facing east. And I think on that kind of corner there, so that would be the northern corner, you can see that kind of made up ground in that area, and there's a bit of cutting, I think, in that corner there, just at that point. The section below that would be a view, again, within the playing pitch, this time facing west. And again, you can see some considerable cutting now in this corner here of the site. And the other section would be a view from within the tennis courts, this time facing east. And again, you can see the existing land levels, and here you can see the cutting taking place. Now on site this morning, I think members will have noted the large poplar trees, which would face onto the tennis courts. And you can see there, obviously, development taking place close to the boundary of their kind of root systems. So there is some considerable cutting and filling taking place, and there would have to be some kind of stabilization of that if the trees were to survive beyond the construction stage. I think this isopack kind of drawing kind of articulates that perhaps in a better way. On the western, the reddish and the orangey colours indicate the extent of the cutting. So as you can see on the rugby pitch and football pitch, on the western corner, there is cutting, and then the blue will indicate where the land's been made up. So effectively, both in terms of the tennis courts and in relation to the playing pitch, the land is cut on the western side and transferred to the east to make up those levels. And visually, obviously, in this corner, it helps set that down, and it utilizes a landscape so that it's not as visually intrusive. So that is a positive, obviously, solution, and equally also involves not having to remove the spoil from the site. So again, it's a more sustainable solution in that respect. So just turning to the kind of specification for the pitch, and this won't come as a great surprise, I wouldn't have thought, but in terms of the material, a section of that, it's a synthetic material, which was kind of sat on a shock pad, and then below that there is a sand base and a gravel base to help with the drainage. I've described the ramp which would exist between the pitch and the tennis courts to facilitate access to the tennis courts. Access here at this point to the 3G pitch. The well mesh fencing which would wrap around the courts and the 3G pitch. Tennis courts would be constructed from asphalt, a porous material, obviously to assist with the sustainable drainage. And as I say, there will be a boundary fence around the perimeter of this facility as well. So just in terms of tree loss, the red circles indicate the extent of the trees to be removed. And from your report, I'm sure you will have gleaned that 38 early mature trees would need to be removed to facilitate this development. But in compensation for that, the applicant is proposing off-site planting, which I alluded to earlier within the line edged in blue, which amounts effectively to 130 heavy standard mature trees, and they're positioned on the eastern side of the proposed pitch, the southern boundary, partly along the western boundary of the pitch, and also along the western boundary of the tennis courts to help screen the development in the fullness of time. And in addition to that, there's also considerable scrub planting in terms of native plants, and it amounts to effectively 4,500 native shrub plants, which is quite a considerable amount, and that's designed to offset the environmental biodiversity impacts of the development, which currently, based on the current scoring which has been put forward, and I'll come on to that in a moment, but it achieves more than the 10% provision required. So it would be, as it's presented, G9 compliant. So just in terms of some of the photographs then, this is a view from Gypsy Lane with the site entrance there just on the left, and the catteries and the kennels just on the corner there of the site. It's a view looking down the access road. And then halfway down the access road, obviously you can see the land falling away. The building just here is the new development, the new expansion which has taken place. And effectively, roughly in about at this point here, the site would be gated. This bridleway would be closed, this footpath would be closed, and it would be then obviously part of the operational boundary of the school. So within the site, and this is a view facing east, approximately 25 meters, 30 meters into the site, clearly showing the existing grasslands and the central kind of desire line, which is currently being walked by people who are using it as amenity space. The trees in the foreground would be lost as a consequence of the development. So these trees just here, all of those would be felled as a result of the development. This is a view then facing southwest. The tennis courts would be roughly in this area here. These are the poplar trees that I alluded to, which are shown as retained. But again, given the development that's taking place in the vicinity of these trees, I think there is an issue really in terms of their long-term survival and whether or not they could survive beyond the construction stage. And that's just a wider view, a wider angle view of those same trees, which are obviously quite significant. And again, a closer view of them. I think one of the issues with these is that poplars are quite, they have extensive root systems, and they can be quite intrusive. And I think any development within the vicinity of those trees would have an impact on their long-term survival. So this is a view then close to the southern boundary of the site, but again looking back at that existing tree line. So these are the poplars that I've just been referring to. They are shown mainly as retained. I think you would lose the trees from this point onwards, then down the slope as we look at it. And then a view picking up the tree line that I've just mentioned on the left, and also the tree line on the right. So from this point here, the trees would be lost. And from this point here, I estimate the trees would also be removed. In terms of the footpath, and you will have noted the comments from residents in relation to the existing sets and their historical importance. They're not protected in any way, but obviously of local and social significance. So the path would be kind of terminated close to this point, and that would be then incorporated into the operational boundary of the school. Just to the kind of left as we look at it, there would be a spur connecting into the proposed diverted route, which I described earlier in this presentation. And this is a view from basically where the end of the service road, the vehicle service road terminates, then looking east down the section of that public right of way, which, as I say, would be diverted as a consequence of the development. So I think that kind of ends the presentation in that respect. So just turning to a few issues, if I may, and I will try and be as brief as I can. Just in relation to greenbelt issues, and these are obviously documented in the report as well. So the development is for sport and recreational use, and as indicated in the report, that is one of those exceptions listed in paragraph 150 of the NPPF, providing it doesn't injure the openness of the greenbelt. Insofar as the development relates to boundary treatment, then that would constitute inappropriate development. But the exceptional circumstances which the applicants put forward have also been documented in the report. Just quickly turning to Sport England issues, members will have noted from the report that Sport England have objected to the development. Sport England in this instance are not a statutory consultee. Their objection is on the basis that they consider that there is a need for a robust needs assessment to demonstrate whether or not there is a need for the golf course. And this should have been provided in accordance with paragraph 99. I think the covering report kind of deals with that, and I don't really want to go into any great detail, but the applicant is proposing that they are compliant in terms of the guidance set out in paragraph 99, in that in relation to suffix C of that paragraph, it is for alternative sports and recreational provision, and the benefits of such clearly outweigh the loss of the current or former use. In terms of the footpath itself, the effect of diverting the public bridleway and enclosing this section of the route within the site is to create a secure boundary line and to allow the free flow of staff and pupils to the main school site, where there is car parking, changing and toilet facilities. But I need to stress that if the application is successful, it will be necessary to legally extinguish the effective public right of way, and that's a separate process and would not form part of the planning approval. Just quickly, in relation to trees and ecology, the applicant has carried out a full tree survey and a arboricultural impact assessment. In terms of direct tree impacts, the proposed development requires the removal of 38 trees, as I've mentioned. The vast majority of these are category B trees, so therefore of good quality. Although the trees which require removal are centrally located within the site and are partially screened by trees on the periphery of the site, the visual importance of these trees in terms of their group value will mean that their removal will have a significant visual impact. As mentioned in the presentation, as part of the mitigation strategy, 3-for-1 planting is proposed, and this will obviously take place off-site, and these will be mature, heavy standard trees. However, in terms of climate change and the declared council's climate emergency, the value of these trees should be recognised in terms of their carbon storage, their mitigation of air, noise pollution and flooding. And since Leeds has declared a climate emergency, the value of these trees in terms of carbon sequestration has recognised greater emphasis in terms of established trees, and the priority should be about retaining established trees where possible. And only in exceptional circumstances should we be considering the removal of those trees, especially if there are available options, and those should be explored fully. In terms of the ecological reports and surveys the applicant has submitted, these have been assessed in terms of the impact on the habitat and wildlife, and as noted in the covering report, the council's nature conservation officer has also reviewed this and concluded that the semi-improved grassland areas are likely to be a moderate distinctiveness rather than low distinctiveness. And if this is the case, the biodiversity metric, which has been submitted, will need to be revisited and recalculated, as its botanical qualities may have been understated. In response to this, the applicant has published a further report, additional ecological information, and that was carried out on the 29th of June. And the conclusion of that survey is that their initial findings are unchanged. So we've reconsulted our nature conservation officer following the receipt of these supplementary details. Those were only received on the 4th of July, and to date, I've not had a further update. So clearly there is a potential issue in that respect, which we will obviously detail further when we get to a detailed stage of presenting this for determination. So effectively, I think that kind of covers all of the issues I've tried to describe. The presentation includes and highlights a number of questions which members are now respectfully asked to consider. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. That was a lot to take in. But before we go to discussion, could I call Jenny to the table? Jenny? I think Jenny represents Middleton Park. Yeah, you've got 4 minutes to address us, Jenny.
Thank you. I actually have a statement to read out on behalf of the chair of the trustees. It's about 4 minutes 10, if you could please bear me that. Thank you very much. Thank you. The land in question is part of the Middleton Park, and the Friends of Middleton Park object. Although we fully support provision of outdoor sports for children in local community groups and organisations, we strongly object to this application as we think it represents a poor return for both the local community and the park. Our objection covers a number of areas. Changes to the landscape. The building of the pitch will involve substantial remodelling of the land because there is an approximate 10-metre slope that will be needed to be evened out, and this will come at considerable cost. Felling of such a significant number of mature trees, even if replaced on a positive basis, can only be replaced with saplings, meaning many years will elapse before they have any impact on carbon reduction. Potential flooding of the park and of the Southley estate. 2 years ago, and again earlier this year, heavy rain produced flooding in the park, which was exacerbated by the current school 3G pitch. This will only worsen with the new pitch closer to the park boundary. We also note that the water control documents in the planning application indicate that microplastics will be washed from the pitch into the local watercourses, and this can only be harmful for the environment. Change of route and loss of an historic public right-of-way which runs alongside the current school boundary as a cobbled path. This road used to run to the old Parkside farm, and it's been in place since at least 1852. The proposed right-of-way replacement is far less suitable as it involves significant extra distance and elevation and doesn't directly connect with onward public rights-of-way and paths. We also note that lighting hasn't been included in the application, but fully expect it to be added later. Extensive floodlighting so close to an area of semi-ancient woodland can only have a detrimental impact on that woodland, no matter how well screened it is by planting, and light pollution from the existing 3G pitch is already quite significant. Lack of consultation. Although the planning application indicates that the views of the local community organisations were sought prior to putting the plan forward, we don't recall receiving any such communication from the school. The application includes the need for substantial security fencing, which, although will be screened by trees, will nevertheless extensively impact the view of the land from the park and the availability and access to green space by the local community. While we reiterate that we support the school's use of outdoor space for education and sport and encourage them to explore the use of Middleton Park as part of their activities, we think the application needs to address existing provision in a more cost and space efficient way. For example, we understand that the school rugby pitch is currently underutilised because it suffers from water retention, and we think the challenges of that pitch should be resolved before looking outside the current school boundary. Finally, we note that the original planning application ignored the fact that the land under the proposal was added to the Middleton Park estate in early 2020, following representation from the Friends. This land is a valuable addition to the park, being adjacent to the Beeston Parkside housing estates and close to other areas of South Leeds. It's the entry point into the park from those areas and well used by those communities. The land and the public right-of-way provides a walking and cycling link through to other areas of South Leeds and is very much part of the scheme we've developed with the local community, Cycle Pathways CIC, and Leeds City Council for the rest of the land that was South Leeds Golf Course. It may only represent a small percentage of the overall acreage of the park, but it's an important area of greenbelt meadowland with some significant trees adjacent to an existing local nature reserve and area of semi-ancient woodland. We don't want to see this historical and ecologically significant area of land lost to a development we think is neither necessary nor wanted by the local community. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions to Jenny? No? Jenny, can I just ask, I visited the park this morning and it was well overgrown. Is it well utilised by the community on a daily basis?
It is very well utilised by the local community, yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maria will speak in favour of the application. Thank you both. You've got 4 minutes between yourselves.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. Cobham School was built with a capacity for 1,050 pupils, but there are now 1,264 on the roll. Whilst the school has recently gained a new modular building, it also took in another Bulge cohort of 60 places, and more recently, an extra 30 children from September 2022 at the request of Leeds City Council. In line with Department for Education guidance for soft outdoor PE spaces and based on the school's current pupil number, the school has a deficit of 35.5% of outdoor sport provision. This has forced the PE department to reduce the range of sports that can be studied. However, the proposed new facilities will allow an increase in capacity for football, rugby and tennis. This will also ensure that pupils can study practical sport and take part in more extracurricular sporting activities. The application site was chosen as it is council-owned land and due to its location directly adjacent to the school site that allows the integration of the secure line boundary for safeguarding reasons and to avoid unnecessary management and logistical issues that would arise from use of remote facilities. Cobham School was judged to be outstanding in all areas in the Ofsted inspection in February this year. And in order to maintain the standard, it is important that the school has the facilities to deliver their curriculum and to provide the pupils with the environment that encourages the growth. The proposed development will also be made available for community use. As confirmed in a position statement, South Leeds Golf Course was run privately and it closed in 2019 due to a decline in memberships and ongoing vandalism of the site. The council currently runs 2 golf courses in Leeds, but despite having expertise in this field, they made the decision to use the site for alternative purpose. The land now forms part of Middleton Park Estate that is subject to a wider master plan. The proposed development will result in a removal of 38 young to early mature trees. For clarity, none of these trees are covered by tree protection orders. The impact of removing the trees is acknowledged, but all of the trees are being replaced at 3:1 ratio, in line with LCC policy. In addition, we recently added 15 more trees, which means that 130 new trees will be planted as a result of this application. We are also undertaking extensive shrub planting within a wider site with a mix of native tree and shrub species, totaling 2.4 hectares. In terms of biodiversity position, the recently updated calculation shows that there will be 21.95% net gain in biodiversity following the development. This is significantly above the required 10%. As noted in our submission, we also confirmed that proposed facilities have been designed to meet Sport England and Lawn Tennis Association standards. As outlined in position statement, placing the proposed development within a current school boundary would result in a temporary loss of existing pitches, which will further exacerbate the current issues. There will also be a temporary loss of car parking due to need to form a construction site access. However, more importantly, placing the proposals on existing sport pitches would not resolve the deficit issue. Also, having undertaken further analysis, it has been established that the existing grass pitch is too small to accommodate the proposal. I would also would like to point out the existing sport pitches are located in close proximity to residential properties, so the impact on the amenity will need to be considered. In response to the early objections by Friends of Middleton Park, I just wanted to clarify members that none of the trees that we are providing will be sampling size, and also that we are putting measure in place so that the rubber crumb from the PG pitch will not make its way to a watercourse. To conclude, the proposals will deliver a beneficial addition to the school facilities, which is needed since the school repeatedly accepted additional
4 minutes,
pupils.
Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry. The last sentence I've got, it was that, and in our opinion, we comply with the planning policy and all planning considerations have been taken into account. That was it. Thank you.
Thank you. Does members have any question to? Oh dear. Let me start now. Keep your hands up. Okay. Councillor Hamilton, just keep your hands up for me, please. Can I just ask, at this moment in time, do you have a tennis court?
So I do understand that there are some tennis markings within the multi-use game area within the school, existing school site.
And is it used?
I believe that all facilities within the school site are used, regardless of drainage issues. Unfortunately, the school still have to use it as much as they need because of the deficit. So they don't get to pick. It's just much harder when it's waterlogged.
Well, can I ask you, you're saying that it's waterlogged. Have drainage been looked at to implement drainage for those pitch?
So obviously existing playing pitches are outside of the red line boundary of the application that I represent, but I understand that, yes, the school have looked at what can be done. So there's only, obviously the issues with the draining of the pitch are quite, annoying to the school because in winter months it's much harder to exercise on them. However, the calculations that we've done to show the deficit actually take into account the pitch being used at all times. So as much I have mentioned the issues with drainage in my planning submission, but they haven't really been taken into consideration when calculating everything. So they said that they have looked at it. Unfortunately, I didn't have to consider this as part of my application in further detail.
Okay. You mentioned that the school had to have to take on extra children. All the schools in Leeds have to take on extra children, but so to me, we had no choice in most schools, and there's a couple of schools that are known as larger than yours. However, you said about they have looked at the pitch being waterlogged. Have they looked at I don't know, turfing it, building a pitch on top of it, etc.?
So with the additional number of children, I appreciate that this is a situation for a lot of school in Leeds and I work on a lot of school projects. But I just wanted to say that I have spoken to school about this, and the partial reason why they agreed to take extra children was because the ability to have the additional sport pitches and the fact that they were told that this is coming forward. So that's why they were willing to take extra children, and that's what I was told. In relation to the existing pitch, unfortunately, I can't really comment on in regard to what they thought about the grass playing pitch. But what I've done personally, I had a look whether I could place development that we are proposing on the area of the existing grass pitch, and it's not big enough to fit 3G pitch to Sport England standard. So unfortunately, the area of existing grass area is just not big enough. So the size of the pitch is 68 meters times 100. And there's also 3-meter runoff area. So it just wouldn't fit. A quick look on Google Maps could show that it's just not big enough.
Councillor Giovanni.
Thank you, Chair. You're looking at putting a 3G pitch in. Why?
So I understand that the reason that they're going for 3G pitch is because they can do multiple sports and it's more durable, and also they can use it during all seasons because it doesn't become waterlogged. So it's just the suitability of it. And also for rugby, our pitch has shock pad underneath, so it's much more suitable to play rugby, and it's actually safer for the children and the community to use the playing pitch that is kind of shock pad. I understand that obviously a lot of members of the community would prefer this to be a grass pitch, but from the usage perspective, and the school already has the equipment to maintain it because they've got existing 3G pitch, it's much better for them.
A local sports club in my ward with a lease on council land has just obtained several £100,000 of funding for grass pitches from the Football Trust. That's a club with over 100 teams. That will be used all through winter with no problems. 3G pitches destroy wildlife. We should not be looking at putting 3D pitches in as a first choice.
Councillor Borden.
I think one of the
to an extent, one of the selling points, and I think something that was kind of commendable to an extent is, and obviously a worry as well, was we're taking away community land to be given to effectively a private enterprise. But I guess the offset of that was, well, it was to be then provided for the rest of the community when the school's not open. So 2 questions. So to my knowledge, when I look on the website, your current pitches that you do have isn't offered out of school time. So I guess, just a confirmation actually is something happening after school and during the summer months, and who is expected to run that during the summer, because it just seems on the face of it that it would just be for the school children and not for the wider community to use. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So the existing sport facilities, just to clarify, are available for community use. The school is quite busy. They also lend some of the internal spaces within a school. So the school, they don't have the school-specific community use agreement. However, they're using Leeds City Council school lettings team to run it on their behalf. So there is an extensive schedule of different facilities. So apologies that you haven't found this on the school website, because ultimately you have to be redirected to the council's websites because they manage for them. So the idea is, and obviously it has been provided within the submission documents, that the new facilities will be added to existing schedule of the community use. And this school is very popular. They use all the pitches are used, school even used for a Sunday church. So they want for the community to be using it. And obviously the charges are set by Leeds City Council. There's already charging schedule. However, given that this is academy, they've got some control over the bookings. They can cancel or allow some bookings past the hours. So I hope that clarifies and answers your question. Thank you.
Councillor Campbell.
Thank you. You make great play of the fact that the school's increased in size, and when we were on site, we noticed the brand new building that has been erected. Why didn't you include the pitches as part of that application?
Thank you, Councillor. So I wasn't actually the agent for the phase 1 application, but I have reviewed it obviously for the purposes of submission of this one. I don't understand I don't know at this stage why these proposals were not included. However, the phase 1 application actually outlined where the pitches were going. It could be anything to do with funding or timing, but basically it was planned at the time of submission of the modular building application, but this just wasn't, the details were not ready. So if you look at the site location plan and even officer's report for phase 1 application, our site has already been outlined, and what it said that this is phase 2, hence we refer to it as phase 2, and this will be submitted under a separate application. But unfortunately, I was brought in at the pre-application stage for this application. So I don't know the nitty-gritty details why this didn't go together. But I do know that the school had the additional building, had to move the tennis court, and then since then they continue to take more children, something that they didn't know at the time the modular building was being developed, that they're going to end up with that many additional kids.
You mentioned that the school had been told that they could have extra pitches. Do you know who told them that?
So the reason why a school feels that way, and obviously been told, because obviously there are different processes, and I understand this. So there was a executive board approval for funding for this, I understand, and I can bring our project manager, Amy Smith, to answer that in more detail a couple of years ago, if I remember correctly. So obviously, in addition to that, any development will still have to go through the planning process. So I appreciate there are 2 different processes, but the school felt that this is going ahead. The funding's been allocating. Obviously, a different department of the council is saying, yes, we are happy to give you that land because it's adjacent to your site. And yes, you can use it for school pitches. That doesn't change the fact that we do need to get planning permission, and I do understand that. Should I bring Amy Smith to add to that? Is that sufficient?
Well, that's slightly vague. So who specifically said, in effect, you could have this land for playing pitches?
I will have to defer this question to Amy.
I can't give a specific individual officer, but I can refer back to the June 2020 Executive Board report at which the project was approved, and it outlined that there would be 2 phases of the project. The reason included in that report as to why this phase of the pitches wasn't included in the first as one phase is the timescales and the need to get those children in place for September 2022 start of term. So it was a timescales and type programme issue, as often is the case on the school expansion schemes.
Can I ask another question in relation to public use? And I think we've touched on the ability of the general public to actually get and use this facility if permission was given. There are a number of elements, because we've just had something similar in my ward. And that might be a question for you, and it might be a question for highways. Do you feel that the car parking you're providing will be adequate for extensive public use? Whereabouts are the changing facilities? How will the car park be managed so that it's not used inappropriately or at the wrong time? How many people do you expect to use the pitch? Because it is a quite substantial pitch. It's not a single, I suppose, single pitch. It's more of a double pitch. And more importantly, I suppose, to all of us is what happens to the income that this pitch will generate?
So I will try my best to answer the question. So first of all, it will be about car parking. So as part of the phase 1, the school had a new car park put in place, and I think you might have seen it today at the site visit, just further up from the access road. So I've done some calculations how much car parking this facility can generate. So I've done it on the number of players, for rugby being 15, refs, spectators, and the same for tennis. So basically, we can fill the car park if everybody turns up and everybody drives individually, but we also have another car park available within the school grounds. For example, if the facilities are available on the weekends between, let's say, I don't remember the exact hours, between 10 a.m. till 5 p.m. The gates will be open, the access will be allowed, so people can use the car parking. I could speak to the school about any putting a member of staff or anything in place so people don't just use it as additional car parking in the area. However, we do have enough car parking. We've got 47 dedicated just specifically to the tennis court and a pitch. And then also we've got 60 more car parks. They're not going to be used by members of staff on the weekends. And during the week, I think the hours are from 6 p.m. till 9 p.m. Again, the same scenario. So as far as I remember, I got a response from Highways to my calculations saying that this is acceptable. So basically what I've done, I calculated the worst case scenario. And obviously, in terms of school facilities like this, and you might appreciate this yourself, people generally travel together. This is not, it's not going to use for international games or anything like that. However, I still estimated, as I said, the worst case scenario. So yes, I do feel we've got enough parking. In terms of changing facilities, as you know, we're not building any changing facilities as part of this planning application. So there are existing changing rooms inside the school. In terms of what happens to the funding, I don't actually know what happens currently, but I believe that if we just add this facility to the existing charging schedule that is run by Leeds City Council, Leeds City Council school lettings department will be able to answer this. I'm more than happy to speak to them to tell me how is this going to be managed and how is the funding being allocated. Thank you.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. So I think a lot of my questions have been answered, but my puzzlement, I suppose, is you are offering this facility out for use to the general public when not in school hours, yet you aren't putting an application in for any lighting. So how are they going to actually be able to use it?
I mean, it's an excellent question. So basically, at pre-application stage, this application did include floodlighting. However, given the proximity to the ancient woodland and discussions with planning and ecology at that time, we decided not to proceed with the floodlighting. I mean, it's an excellent point because it limits the ability of community to use it, especially in winter months. But unfortunately, the key reason for, well, not unfortunately, but the key reason why we're proposing this is to allow the school to deliver the PE and curriculum. So we had to scale it down and take those columns out, because otherwise we also working against the clock. Otherwise we won't have it in time. And they've, like I said, they've waited quite a long time for it. Thank you.
Thank you. So in essence, it's for the school and not the community.
Yes, the primary use of the playing pitches is for the school because of the deficit and everything. However, we still the facilities will be made available for communities. However, I want to acknowledge that I appreciate that maybe a professional sport club wouldn't want to sign up to use the new 3G pitch full time. And if the school wish to include floodlighting in the future, they will obviously have to apply for it and submit a planning application. Thank you.
Councillor Anderson.
Excuse me. A number of questions. One, you are going to reroute the footpath and close part of it. Are you saying that that is being done for safeguarding purposes or other reasons? And is this now standard policy that you shouldn't be able, that the public shouldn't be able to walk alongside school sports pitches? If you can answer that one first of all, I'll then follow up with other ones.
Thank you, Councillor. So yes, so we currently have a footpath and a bridle way that runs between the existing site and the application site. And the only reason for diversion and for closure of that footpath and diversion to below the pitches is safeguarding. So the idea is that school would like to incorporate fencing around the pitches. So during PE lessons and during the school hours, they've got a secure line boundary that they need to, basically something that they need to provide on the risk assessment, something they need to have. So that's the reason why we're doing it. There is a separate application that's been submitted to public right-of-way team for the diversion. So the public will be consulted on that. In terms of whether this is a standard, yes, so I understand that if the playing pitches go ahead, and obviously they are for the school to deliver the curriculum and the land will be transferred to the trust, they will form part of the school site. Any school site in England should have 2.4 metre, at least 2.4 metre fencing in all, for safeguarding reasons. So yes, it will be a standard for this not to be open purely because it will form part of a school site. Thank you.
But in order for the public to access it, will they not then have to come in through that fencing at some point, or a gate somewhere along that fencing? Will the public, so that they can use it, not have to use that? Now, I'll be frank, where I'm coming from, in my area, Ralph Thorsby High School got sports pitches built beside it. There is a massive gap between the two locations, and so the pupils have to walk along the open space. It's a road that everybody walks up and down regularly to, and that's acceptable for Ralph Thorsby. Now, one of the drawbacks, and I want to know your comments on this, was that in order to give the public access, they had to leave the gates open for two reasons. One, to enable maintenance to be done and the sports pitches to be cleaned up on a daily basis. And if you are going to allow members of the public, again, coming back to Ralph Thorsby, one of the drawbacks was that some residents decided to take their dogs onto the sports pitches. The dogs do what dogs do. And so Parks and Countryside were having to arrange to get that cleaned up on a daily basis before pupils were accessing it? How can we be sure that these are not going to be the unintended consequences of allowing members of the public to do it? Now you're going to safeguard it. So that's that one. And then after you've answered that one, I've got another one.
Thank you, Councillor. So, well, the idea is that in order to provide the safeguarding, the gates will have to be closed during school operational hours. Nobody will be allowed. So the footpath is being diverted outside of the school site. So basically the existing footpath will not be destroyed, just the access to it will be restricted. But there will be no need for members of the public to access the school site in order to access the footpath. And also the gates will not be open during the school operational hours because community use only starts out of hours. In terms of any maintenance, the Parks and Countryside will only be maintaining the area of the wider mitigation within the blue line boundary. The idea is for the land, I understand, to be transferred to the trust. So Coburn School and the trust will be responsible for cleaning the playing pitches and the maintenance. It's not the, it won't be the council.
Fine, but when the area is open for public use, the school is closed, then the residents will need to access the area that goes along towards the footpath. So I can see the point of it maybe being closed during school hours, but why is it needing to be closed outside of school hours? I mean, I agree with the safeguarding during school hours. No arguments, no problems with that. But outside of school hours, will the public not need to use at least part of that route in order to walk down to get into the site?
I mean, I can speak to the design team and see whether there can be gate put in and this can be open during weekends and after school hours, because as far as I'm aware, the idea is to keep the existing footpath in situ. Because we closing the access during the school operational hours, and some people would like to also use the footpath during that time, we have to divert it. We can't just leave it and say, from now on, you will have it from 6 p.m. and only on weekends. However, I'll have to get back to you on that and see how the design of the fence will work. Because obviously, if we are successful with the diversion, the idea was to block the access, but I will see whether there is a possibility to have the gate open, so on the weekends and after hours the public can still use the old path. Nevertheless, they will be provided with a new one.
Again, the head teacher on site this morning pointed out that the current car park is going to be used for people, residents outside of school hours. They're going to, because we were discussing where the school parks, and some teachers can park at the front of the school, others at the back. But what he was saying was that the car park at the rear was going to be public car parking, so that when people were coming to use the facilities. So to do that, they've got to come down the route. They then have to go in a left through the gate, which is a secure gate. And we were shown this morning how very secure the site is. So they then come, if they've then parked their cars, they've then got to come back up that little route, go back through the gate, unless you're going to leave the gate open. And I don't think they're suggesting they do that. So there's going to have to be some organisation. Have you thought it through? That's the basic thing. Have you really thought through the consequences of this? And should we be getting further information back to make sure that the public who feel they're going to get access are going to come up against gated areas, and all of a sudden you're then going to have questions asked, why can you not do it? Local councillors then have to say, well, why are you doing this? And then the argument over safeguarding will come up, which I agree, and as you know, because of the problem in my ward, but exactly the same arguments being put forward, safeguarding has to take precedence over other issues. So those members of the community who think they're going to be able to get access are suddenly going to find that they're not. So you might be, so I'm not asking you to comment on that, just need to be aware of that. Now, the carbon, the climate change, bearing in mind that this is a Leeds City Council application, have Leeds City Council provided a detailed carbon account for this site, showing the asset value of each of the trees to be taken down. Glengorner will provide that information if you want, and how much carbon is going to be removed as a result of those trees being there, and how much carbon will then be saved by the additional trees you're going to plant, and how many years it's going to take before parity occurs. Because that's what I mean. I've no doubt planting the trees, yes, it's going to save a lot of carbon, but it could take 30, 40 years for it to reach the same level of maturity as some of the trees there. And this is a Leeds City Council application, which means there's no excuse that it's all you need to do is go to the policy. Leeds should be exceeding their policy requirements voluntarily, not needing to be told to do it. Unlike we can't tell other developers that they shouldn't do it, Leeds should be volunteering to provide this carbon balance sheet for us. Is that available or not?
So, okay, in terms of the carbon storage, I'm not aware of the specific assessment that assesses the carbon storage of the existing trees. And I'm also, I mean, in the end of the day, Councillor, this is still a planning application and there's a list of requirements that we need to provide. And my advice to Leeds City Council, in this case, the applicant and my client, is that you need to provide what planning is asking us for. So, however, I appreciate that probably going forward, the council could start requesting specific assessments as such. In terms of exceeding the requirements, we are luckily we are exceeding the requirements because there is a policy that obviously in the first instance asks us to consider not removing any trees, and we have tried our best. Second of all, it's 3-to-1 replacement, and we're exceeding that. So we're removing 38, which basically will require us to provide 114 trees, and we're providing 130. And contrary to Objector's comments earlier today, all the trees are heavy standard. And if I have an opportunity now, I just wanted to say that I actually personally send email and consultation responses to Friends of Middleton Park, and I'm more than happy to provide evidence of the correspondence. I never received a response, however, I have done that. Thank you.
And then,
Councillor, and there's not many more.
Oh, you're asking me to analyse the application.
No, I do, but I just wondering.
From a climate change perspective, which is something that we as a city council have agreed, and I personally think we've got.
No, I do agree. I'm asking you.
Take more
how many more have you got?
Another 2.
Okay.
The same information we would need on the biodiversity gain. There is a tool that is available. Can that be provided as well? So hopefully that just to make a point. But the alternative locations. Do you know if the school have applied for funding to mitigate the alternative the areas where there's drainage problems? In other words, have they applied for funding? I know it's not part of your drawing, so I'm asking you the question because you're the person here. It probably does fall more to Amy. Have the school applied for funding to carry out mitigation or adaptation measures to the existing playing fields in order to bring them up to site, to bring them up to standard so that they could be utilised?
Just before I pass it on to Amy, Councillor, the playing pitch that becomes waterlogged in some months is still fully utilised because they have no choices, because they have deficit of almost 40%. So Amy will answer question on funding, but I just wanted to say for biodiversity, we have full assessment, including the matrix for that. And the requirement is for 10% net gain, and our net gain is 21.94%. I'll pass it over to Amy about the funding, because as you know, I can't really answer that.
Yeah, just on that question, just to reiterate that even if the school fixed the problems of waterlogging, it is currently fully used and they would still have a deficit of 35.5%. I don't know if the school has applied for funding to fix this, but what I do know is that the school has committed to funding the uplift from grass to 3G on the proposal in this forthcoming application. So I don't know the full details of the school's budgets. I don't know if they're trying to fix that problem, but they are funding a reasonable chunk of this proposed development.
Okay. I thought it was two you had. Councillor Jabari.
Thanks, Chair. Following on from the questions about access, where are the changing rooms that the community users of this football pitch would use?
The existing changing rooms are within the existing main school building. I can clarify and send the location. So yeah, and also at the pre-application stage, we also considered putting extra changing rooms. However, as you remember, this is a greenbelt site, so proposing a building within a greenbelt ultimately makes it harmful by definition and inappropriate development. So that was also removed together with the lighting columns. However, there are existing changing rooms. It's just that it will be a bit more journey to the changing rooms for people who'll be using the new 3G pitch. I hope this answers your question, Councillor. I'm happy to provide the exact location within the building in the later date.
Thank you very much. You have answers a lot of questions. I'm not going to ask questions. I'm just going to comment really. I don't think you're really thinking of the community, because I believe when you take things from a community, you give something back to that community. But as my colleague mentioned, the 3D, you know that's not really appropriate where you're going to put really. So what are you giving back to the community? Have you teach your young people about the environment? You are taking away so many trees, very useful land, and you haven't really says what you're giving back to the community.
So I thank you for your comments, Chair, first of all. I mean, I guess what we're giving back to the community is that the school is giving a lot to community, just being present within Beeston and Middleton Park area. And the fact that they an outstanding school and in all areas, and they clearly needed to deliver the PE. So just on the fact that we're taking it from community, I just wanted to clarify, and that's really, really important here. South Leeds Golf Club was a privately owned golf course. So there was a membership price, and ultimately the reason why it closed had nothing to do with this project. It closed due to decline in membership and vandalism of the site. I don't know if members are aware, but the average cost of golf a year, together with equipment and membership, is £900 a year. That excludes a big chunk of community from Beeston and Middleton Park to actually
With
participate.
the best will in the world, Chair, this is not really relevant, is it? You know, how much you pay for a golf membership is not really relevant to what a 3G pitch.
I know you weren't happy at residents talking to me this morning, but one of them did and pointed out to me that they'd used this particular location to walk for tens of years, which is so in other words, she was obviously walking on it when it was a private course. So in other words, there is, albeit it might be a permissive way across it or something like that, but there is still been residents over a number of years have been using that area to move from point A to point B, wherever point A is and wherever point B is. So the fact it was a private course was to be respected, but also it was good that the private course also allowed them free access to move around.
Hamilton. Yes, my question is regarding on page 60, where it says the community use agreement for previous planning permission associated with the school has not been implemented. And you're telling us that the community will be able to use the school. Will the community be able to use the school also during the holidays, or is it term time only? And why haven't that agreement been implemented?
So I believe that this relates to school having school-specific agreement rather than using a school lettings facility. So some schools in Leeds manage their own lettings to have the their own branded community use agreement. We can provide one as part of this application. This wouldn't be a problem, but the school has quite successful schedule and they're really busy. I can confirm the exact details because I've got a copy of the schedule, including charges, but I didn't think to bore the councillors with the details of what's exactly going to be there. But that's really, really easy for me to bring and send over to the planning officer as part of this application.
Can I just say, academy schools, before they become academy school, especially a couple that I know of, they agreed that the community would be able to use the school in the evening after school and during the summer holidays. And it lasted for 2 years. And then after that, they start putting blocks. We're refurbishing, we're upgrading, etc. And the community has been able to use the schools for summer schemes, etc. So you're saying that it's with the council, the lettings, but then it's going to be the school and the school can decide whether they use it or not. So the agreement haven't been implemented. So why you believe that it's going to be implemented if the planning go ahead for the pitches?
Councillor, thank you. I do understand your concerns, but I was assured by the school that the school is currently used by the community and there's only different mechanism that they're using. I understand that in line with the Leeds City Council's lettings policy, if you're an academy, you've got some additional control in order to, for example, you can accept additional booking, etc. But they are using charging schedule by Leeds City Council and they're using that specific team. I have contacted that team and asked them how much are the charges, what's the cost, because people ask me these questions at the pre-application stage, what would be the cost of renting the pitch? So I'm more than happy to take that information. But like I said, if we need to provide brand new community agreement to make this application acceptable, we will be happy to do this. That's not a problem. The reason why this is not a problem is because the school are happy for the community to continue to use the existing facilities and the new facilities proposed under this application. Thank you.
I'm going to allow Councillor Smith to ask one short question. Last one.
Thank you, Chair. So if the pitches are unsuitable, largely unsuitable for school use currently, how are they still suitable for community use currently?
I wouldn't say that the current existing facilities are unusable. There's recognized problem of the grass pitch during winter months with water. There's obviously an existing multi-game area and a 3G pitch the school are using, there's no problem with that. So, well, community are still free to book it. I believe that if there is issue with water a specific period, whoever's making the booking is being notified because the school is conscious about how it's going to look like if you continue to use it. However, like I said, they haven't got much choice at the moment. They have to be using it to meet the PE. They've already reduced amount of sports they can teach. So there is a problem, but unfortunately that problem sometimes it has to be there and they have to keep using it because they haven't got much choice.
Thank you very much. Thank you, that's it. Councillor Hamilton, a question for officer, and then did you raise your hand, Councillor Hamilton? My question, first of all, is for clarification regarding the exec board papers. What they've read. I just want to know get clarification on that. Is that exactly what it's?
Well, yeah, in summary, there was an exec board a report back in 2020 because Nikki's had the opportunity to have a quick look, and it did actually say that the land could be provided to the school for the pitch provision. However, it does caveat it by saying subject to planning. So that caveat is clearly there. So I don't know. You could argue it should have been done the other way, and perhaps planning should have been involved prior to the executive board report. But we are where we are. I think is.
Can I just add? It's not unusual when there's disbursement of funds. Many of you councillors will know that they will allocate funds because there's timing issues and planning permission can't be implemented at certain stages. And the report does appear to acknowledge that. But we can certainly. It's the June 2020 report that deals with it. So if you go to those exec papers, you can certainly take a read, and it does caveat that it's subject to planning approval.
So that's why this planning application is here. That's why it's here, because exec board has already stated that the school could. Well, isn't that what it's saying? It went to
there's an
exec board.
allocation of funds that are presented for the upgrade of the pitch. It does acknowledge that it's a phase 1 and phase 2. I can only go on what's been put in the executive board report, but I just want to sort of set that context.
Well, you see, I'm hearing differently anyway. I know you've explained it to me, what exec paper has said. So, okay, my question over to you, Nigel, is to ask about the pitch. Have it been investigated, and is there anything else that can be done? Is there an alternative? Like I ask the clients regard to could drainage be put in? Can the pitch be built up, etc.? Because that's what we're looking at in my ward. You know, we have got drainage issues, and obviously we're looking for funding. But these sort of ideas have come up, and is there an alternative? And also with regards to removing of the 38 trees, is the council happy with that? I mean, I know they said they're going to plant 110, whatever. You know, are we happy with that? You know, so those are my questions to you anyway.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, so in terms of the alternatives for the pitch, I mean, clearly, as part of my kind of overall kind of presentation, I suggested that the trees are quite significant. We have a climate change agenda. The priority should be on retaining trees, and if there are alternatives, they should be fully explored and examined. And I think they should be examined forensically as well. You know, I think that's a level of detail that we should go down to kind of make that assessment. I think it's a big leap of faith to jump from losing 38 mature trees or early mature trees to then suggesting that under policy land 2 that the development is compliant if it's a 3-for-1 replacement, because what that doesn't take into account is the carbon capture, the considerable benefits both visually and from a climate change point of view that those trees contribute to the area. So I think that is a leap of faith, as I say. So in terms of alternatives, the applicant's right. I mean, you know, that the way it was presented, that pitch would not work on the existing site. But what I would say is that the pitch presented is a tier 1 level pitch. And what that means is in terms of its, not necessarily specification, but in terms of its size. And I'll refer to rugby league because that takes the greatest amount of space in terms of the runoff requirements. So that pitch would be 120 metres long. The pitch itself is 100 metres. The runoff areas are 10 metres. So it's 120 metres, and I think it's 70 metres wide with the runoffs. So that's a tier 1 Super League, professional league standard. The applicant suggested, and I think she made it clear, that the primary objective isn't for community use, it's for school use. So if you were then to apply school standards and look at the Sport England guidance in relation to those standards, then effectively you could use a tier 4 sized pitch. And if you did that, in my view, that could be accommodated on the existing site. Tier 4 is available and usable for community and club level rugby. It wouldn't obviously meet professional standards, but it would serve that community if a community use element was to be introduced. But I also accept that if you were to introduce floodlighting, particularly on the pitch to the north of the school campus, then that would be close to residential properties. The pitch to the east of the site, perhaps less so. But these days, modern lighting standards would enable direct lighting to be used. It's very efficient. The light spillage is almost non-existent. And there are many examples throughout the city where floodlighting and community use work kind of, cheek by jowl with residential properties. And with the right conditions, you can obviously restrict the hours of operation. So there are controls in place, and it is deliverable in my view. Now, if that's incorrect, then I'll stand corrected. But I think at the outset, those alternatives ought to be explored, and as I say, forensically assessed.
About the drainage. Well, could funding go in to rectify the problem that they say they have? Because we're desperate for money to rectify our drainage problem.
There's always a solution, and drainage attenuation could be introduced. Now, I think the point that the applicant made was that those are existing pitches, and that it wouldn't improve the overall deficit, which is also obvious. It's obvious, isn't it? If you're reusing what's already there, you're not increasing the provision. But equally, and I did note a slight tonal difference in the approach, because in the submission it talks about those pitches being unusable during periods of wet weather, and I think that kind of change to the pitches remain in use during periods of wet weather. So I think so there is scope to obviously carry out attenuation. There is scope to make the site better. There is betterment to be had. There just needs to be an appetite to do so.
One last thing. I mean, I know you've explained about the alternative and what can be done. Just being not quite clear with regards, I'm asking this question. Would they be able to build on top of it, sort of astroturf? Am I thinking of the right thing? No, or something else? I know about once they've done the drainage, they can put sort of like a pitch or something on top of it. Maybe I got it wrong, but I'm not technical.
So a 3G pitch then, which is effectively, yeah. I mean, there's one there at the moment on the site, and it is obviously possible, but as I say, that would not be at the size in which of reflecting what's being proposed at the moment, but it is physically possible.
Just one more. At this moment in time, regarding the tennis pitches that they want, so they have multi-use, don't they, where they can play tennis? They're requiring how many tennis court? 3. Is that necessary for a school? None of the schools that I know has 3 tennis court. And the inner cities. I mean, and anyway, I'll come on to comments.
Yeah, so can I just intervene just for a second or two? everything Nigel has said, I think, in terms of what you could do to a pitch to correct it, or even go down to a 4th-tier pitch as opposed to a 1-tier pitch, that's all absolutely correct. But just add a tiny little bit of balance to this. The other thing that the agent Maria actually said was that, and you've got to just bear this in mind, because don't you just love panel? Because panel gets involved in some really detailed debates. You know, that you never know where you're going to go. I mean, I liken it to that old Forrest Gump thing. You know, it's like life's like a box of chocolates, and panel's like a box of chocolates because you're never quite sure what you're going to get, are you? But this is a very interesting point, is this, because one of the things, just for balance, so yeah, you can correct things like this and throw money at it. Absolutely, you could do. As Nigel says, the downside to that, in that particular location where there's pitches with the drainage difficulties, if you're going to floodlight it, you could end up with amenity issues. So you've got to just take a bit of balance. But also, one of the things that was said, and bear this in mind, this is a school that's got 40% deficiency of school playing pitches now, for whatever reason. That's the situation now. And if you then obviously go on to those pitches and take that one out of operation, plus the equipment and the cabins that you need to facilitate the construction works, you end up with a school that for whatever period of time during that period has then got less than even 40% of doing that. So I just wanted to add that for balance. It's a really difficult decision for you. And just going back to the exec board report, I'm sure at the time that was as well. And I say it was caveated on the basis that subject to planning permission. One of the key things that really we need to tease out of this before we get back to the issue, the points that we've raised. I mean, some of these questions actually you may struggle to answer at this particular stage, but we'll go through them and see what we can do. But I think one thing that we need to try and get out of this is whether members accept, if we can sort all of these problems, that having a pitch in that location is acceptable, because ultimately there's a lot of money will be chucked at this both by the council and the school in terms of doing this. So, you know, if we sorted out the biodiversity, the carbon capture, provided that information to convince you, whether it gives back enough to the community, whether we can provide information to say that they have fully considered that this is the only solution in terms of the location of the pitch. Concerns regarding public access to the setted path, and obviously community use to the 3G pitch. Ultimately, would members support a pitch in this location? Is the question that we ultimately need to get to at some point, because then we need to go away and talk to the applicants of whether they can provide that information to significant detail and depth to convince you that this is the optimum solution. So that's all we're trying to tease out of members today in a way. I mean, is that where we are before we go on to the specific bullet points?
Just 1 minute. I think
I'll save it for comment.
No, it was really yet again, why don't we have somebody from Parks and Countryside such as Glenn Gorner here as an officer when we're discussing the loss of 38 pretty reasonably sized trees? Thank you.
That's it. And question to you.
Yeah. Obviously, there's no good reason why representatives from Parks and Countryside couldn't be present. They haven't been invited is obviously the answer, but they could be invited at the time the application comes forward for determination.
And also Seamus, please. About trees.
Yeah, we wouldn't need both, one or the other. Yeah, could answer the questions, but again, it's actually we kind of sort of touched this when I was talking to Councillor Anderson at one point earlier today. One of the difficulties with this is that at the moment the policy is asking for a 3-to-1 replacement. This goes slightly over the 3-to-1 replacement, so ultimately it's policy compliant. And I understand why members want to go further completely, especially with the situation that we are in terms of climate emergency, etc. But in terms of policy compliant, it is policy compliant. But again, there's no reason why we couldn't be asking for additional trees. We probably yeah, I don't know how many we might get in addition. I mean, that's a debate that the applicant has to have and to consider, isn't it? But again, it's kind of, as I say, if we could sort all this out with additional trees and give you the information, would this site ultimately be acceptable to you in this green belt location? It's a tough one. It really is, because I know that the aspiration here from everybody is to provide the correct facilities for the education of the kids at school, but at the same time, you don't want to reduce or impact upon the community's use of that facility. But panels about tough decisions at the end of the day. So I say, all I want to get out of this today really is an instruction to the officers as to whether this is worth pursuing at all in a way. The reason it's here without a recommendation for a decision is because there is more information required, and we need it to get some sort of steer from members before all this additional work was done, because it will be costly. But are members thinking it's still worth pursuing in this location to get the pitch for that school, which has already got the 40% deficiency? Or are we saying this is absolutely no, it's not going to happen, is this, in that location, because it's just wrong, it's too much impact on the trees, too much of an impact on the environment, too much of an impact on the community? It's difficult, but that's basically where I would like to get at some point from members, if we can.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair. Mine wasn't a question, really. It was more of a response to Mr. Butler's comments with a view to being helpful. I think Mr. Butler set out the issues in front of us very clearly and I think, from my point of view, I think the answer is that during this debate this afternoon, these question and answer sessions, I think as a panel, we've somehow lost a little bit of touch as to quite who the applicant is and what they're intending to do. This is a school. This is a school applicant. This is not Exxon Valdez wanting to build a oil terminal somewhere, although you might have lost track of that from some of the tone of questions. It's an outstanding school in a very deprived ward. Now, notwithstanding the comments from stage right, and if members we could have one meeting, that'd be really helpful. But it's an outstanding school in a deprived ward. Now, I don't know about other members, but I fervently believe in the importance of sport to build character, to build teamwork, to build confidence, to build well-being. I want our schools in deprived areas, when the kids leave those schools, to have the kind of self-confidence we see kids coming from private schools. That's what we should see. And that's what we should want. And that's what schools do. Schools can do. So I place a really high importance on sport in school, Chair. And that's been under a lot of pressure, as we've seen during austerity. But this is a school wanting to expand its sport provision. I think that's really important. And I think this panel's lost a little bit of sight of that in some of the commentary this afternoon. The site that they want to use was previously a privately owned golf course. Now, myself and my fellow zero carbonistas call a golf course an ecological desert, because that's what it is. But it's been gifted to Middleton Park recently. That's fantastic. But the school really needs to expand its facilities. And we've had at length this afternoon, in quite a lot of detail, how there will be a net biodiversity gain from what's proposed so far. The carbon assessment that Councillor Anderson wants is coming with our soon to be unveiled climate emergency-led local plan review, which will be nationally leading edge, and that's going to be fantastic. We can't apply that metric quite yet, Chair. So we have to go with number of trees and net biodiversity gain. And to me, that's a considerable bonus. So to bring around to where I started, I think some of the way we've conducted this afternoon, Chair, is because academies, in terms of community access, have a really, really bad reputation. And if the applicant is wise and is listening and furiously scribbling notes, they would want to think long and hard in Leeds as to why that is. And they would think long and hard as perhaps that they should be an exemplar in perhaps turning that reputation around, Chair. Given that, they're asking the local community, in a sense, to give up a bit of recently gained green space. So they need to think really hard about that. So in answer to Steve, into Mr. Butler's questions, I say we need to look at this location. I think it is a good and appropriate location to this. I think we have issues to solve, Mr. Butler set out, but I don't think in good conscience this panel should turn its face against the application as it is set out now, despite those issues to resolve. I hope that's helpful, Chair.
Surely does, Councillor Walsh, but I don't think the panel are turning their face against the application. We are here to comment and we are here to pass judgment, and that's what members are doing. What pleases you doesn't please the others, and vice versa. I'm not saying I'm not happy with what you said. You're totally right. We're here for the young people. But however, if this, for instance, was a housing development and that land, what would you have said with the green space? Councillor Giovanni.
Thanks, Chair. As you probably guessed from my questions earlier, there are alternatives to this. They haven't been looked at. I suggest, with respect, that you look at the planning application for King George's Field in Horsforth. That's the one which is leased to Horsforth Sports Club and one of their clubs, St Margaret's FC, one of the largest amateur clubs in the country, over 1,000 players, 100+ teams at all ages, and developing a massive girls and women's sides as well. They are in the process of redoing grass pitches with funding. I think it's the Football Trust. I can get the details. Like I said, a few £100,000 of funding from them. And I believe, if I remember correctly from the planning application, I think it's in the planning application, it meets Leeds City Council's policy on grass pitches. This doesn't, obviously, what's in front of us today. And it's fairly obvious that the applicant hasn't looked any further. They've gone for what is probably an easier option. They haven't had to go in for any funding bids or anything. Now, if this was being done as a football pitch that was fully open to the public, not fenced off, not going through a school's lettings policy where the school determines where and when members of the public can use it, it may not necessarily have a lot of the issues it has. Bearing in mind, what Councillor Walshaw's just said is quite correct with the attitude towards academies. And personally, I'm not keen on the City Council giving land to academies. It's happened in other areas, and it's happening here. But if it was being a development for a purely public football pitch that was under, say, the management of something like Horsforth Sports Club and running multitude of community teams, I don't think there'd be an issue if it was on grass. There is an issue, I think, with it being 3G and being fenced off. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It's not just the academy, we have to think of the young people as well. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Chair. It's been an interesting discussion, I think. And I suppose it's, as you say, this panel is always a bit of an exciting ride because you never know what we're going to say. And you certainly never know what we're going to ask. Can I just start by saying, none of us sitting in this room want to stop kids playing. None of us. And we want to get, for kids to have the best facilities they possibly can. Nobody's arguing about that. And I'll just touch on the executive board. The executive board are not the planning authority. We are. So the executive board can say it might be nice if, but we're the ones who have to make the decision. And I have to say, Neil, this morning was one of those examples where site visits are really important. And you unfortunately couldn't go, and that's no issue for me. But had you been on site, I think some of your comments would have been slightly different. Now, I turned up with a fairly open mind, as you should do. Reading the papers, I thought, you know, this is more or less cut and dried. But actually, this is a really significant piece of green belt, really significant. And okay, it may have been a golf club, but if you go there now, you'd never know that. The trees, there are mature trees, there's extensive grassed areas. It's a really important piece of habitat. Now, if you're going to chop that up or take that away from the community, and there may well be the rest of the park next to it, but simply saying there's a bit more, so it's all right, doesn't work for me. If you're going to take that away from the community, you have to say, what's the benefit? And that's what the Act says, isn't it? There should be no development unless there's some real benefit. What's the benefit? Well, there's definite benefit for the school. Let's not argue about that. The school gets benefit. What benefit does the community get? The community don't get any benefit out of this at all. We pressed them really hard about what's the management agreement? How are people going to access this? How is it going to be made available for everybody in that community to use? And as you said, you know, in December, it's unusable because it's dark at 4 o'clock. So there's no community benefit within this whatsoever. And then we got another red herring thrown in my opinion, which is the flooded pitches. One of the reasons we need to do this is because the pitches we have flood. Well, that's not a planning reason for building some more. That's a planning reason for doing something about what you've got. We've already heard that Sports England are not too happy, and that seems reasonable to me. We're losing some mature trees, and okay, we have this discussion about whether it's a 3 for 1, and okay, it's a 3 for 1 and a few more, but we'd be asking for a few more anyway. We'd be asking for a heck of a lot more on a development like this. Do members have any concerns or comments about the ecology? There's a dispute, isn't there? Our ecology officer is saying there are issues as far as he's concerned because the assessment's wrong. And coming back and saying, yes, our assessment's right, is not right. So there seems to be real issues in relation to that. The design solution, well, you're just going in there and taking a field which is currently sloping and chopping it up. There are, you know, the landscaping design doesn't seem to work for me. At no point, going back to your comment on tennis, at no point did anybody make a case for the tennis courts. So I've no understanding as to why you're putting tennis courts in. The local amenity, it will severely impact on the local amenity. It was, as I said, it's an open grassed area, obviously used by lots of members of the public. We saw them on site today. That will go. The footpath, I know it's a different piece of legislation, but diverting the footpath, the new route is less acceptable than the current one. So a straight line, what they're saying is a long curl is better than a straight line. It isn't. The highways issues, and it goes back to this issue, if we have public access to that car park, bearing in mind it is locked, that access road that we went down where it said caps, or was it caps or don't care, I can't remember, that access road we went down is substandard. There's no talk about improving that. I mean, I could go on, Chair, but it seems to me that at the moment, this is unacceptable. And I could not put my hand up and support this as it stands at the moment. Now, that's not to say that in the future something might not come forward, but at the moment, this isn't it.
We are still onto questions, but Councillor Campbell, I just highlight all the, what you call it, we should decide it. And I'm just wondering, should I take any more questions, or should we just go on to comment and just finalize it? Sorry. So I'm just thinking with Councillor Campbell, highlight all these questions in here. Should we just go ahead and make a decision? And is it going to be quick?
Well, it was a comment. I was going to make a comment about this. In terms of additional information,
did come up with the issues that we came up with. So I think that's a good starting point that we need to take forward. But what I would say is I'd go back to the very, very first paragraph in this report where it says the application is presented to Plans Panel following a request from Councillor Sharon Burke, who supports the overarching need for the school's additional sporting provision, but also recognises the weight of public objection. We also heard as well that Councillor Dixon has raised concerns, and there's no reason to doubt that the dispute that Councillor Trustwell may have concerns as well. So I think we need to find out, we've not heard today, what are the views of the local councillors in terms of alternative provision? What would they like to see happening on this land? Equally, I don't think we've heard clearly enough a view from the local community as to what because some of the local community will have children who are at this school. So what do they think about the school facilities? We need to find out a range of views. So I would actually concur with the comment that Councillor Burke has put in here, that I agree, I support the overarching need for the school's additional sporting facilities, but there are objections, and I think it's duty bound on us to try and minimise those objections, or at least come up with adaptation or mitigation in order to do something about that. So that's where my stance is on this one. Yes, I've been critical, but I've been trying to do it as a critical friend rather than to say, no, sorry, not at all. That's certainly my approach.
Asked the question in my briefing what the other councillors were saying, but I take it that they didn't comment. Did they comment? And the report, there's no comment from any other councillors. So you see the two-way, they're just happy either way. I don't know.
We had the opportunity to cross-question, scrutinise, call it whatever you like, with the ward members. I think we'd be able to elicit a number of other valuable comments, because at the end of the day, they know their area far better than probably all of us do, to be honest. And the same goes to anybody else's ward. The only people who know it best are the local ward members. And I think we should respect their views, and we should try and find out what are their views and concerns, and the community as well.
Agree, Councillor, and listen. So at this moment in time, I'll hand over to Steve, then you can go through to see where we will go on this one. Yeah, but I do take all members' comment, they're all valid. And I personally, we are taking too much away from the community. That green space, we have a climate changes and we have to look at it. Again, young people do need play activity, but the question is all these activities, what they put in place is for the young people, or is not just resources to the school as well?
You can't believe how much I look forward to this little bit. I mean, you've all addressed this in a way, but just to put this very, very succinctly, as we stand at the moment, panel is not convinced that this is the optimum solution. And there's a lot to be done by the applicants to convince panel members otherwise. That's where we are, isn't it? They've heard the debate, they've had the questions. I have summarised the issues, and I'll include obviously the views of local councillors if we, when we come back, if we ever get to the point with the decision. I would just like to, I'll reiterate the comments I've captured in terms of biodiversity carbon capture, but because we've got this in front of us, I'd just like to address the bullet points, or at least how I think perhaps members.
Like Campbell did it for you.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I understand completely where we're at. And I think the thing is, with the first comment about do members wish to comment on the Greenbelt issues, you're not really in a position to do so at the moment until you've had further information. So I think that's the situation, isn't it? The second one, do members wish to comment on the suggested very special circumstances put forward by the applicant, whether they clearly outweigh the Greenbelt harm? Again, you're not in a position to do that because you need the additional information. Do members support the principle of considering this application without the requirement for a needs assessment as suggested by Sport England? I think the answer to that is no, isn't it? You want the sport. Yeah, okay. Do members have any comments to make regarding tree loss and the proposed mitigation measures? Well, I've covered that. Carbon capture, biodiversity, we'll seek more planting. Obviously, it is policy compliant now, but we may be able to negotiate additional planting. But the understanding at the moment, I think people appreciate the 3-to-1 ratio in terms of how much carbon capture you get on even an extra heavy standard, which are the more difficult ones to keep alive, by the way. The little twig ones are the better one, oddly, but they will have a greater carbon capture than the smaller ones. The simple matter of fact is it is policy compliant and slightly over that, but there's no reason why we can't try to achieve some additional planting to at least improve the situation. So I think that's the answer on that one. Do members have any concerns or comments relating to the ecology matters? Well, again, you want further information on that. Notwithstanding the extent of the tree loss in visual and design terms, do members support the proposed layout and design solution? This is all about you still not being convinced. So you can only determine that with the additional information, I think. Do members have any concerns or comments related to the potential upon the local community? That's quite obviously a yes. And as I say, there may be an opportunity there will be an opportunity at a later stage for the community to address when an application comes forward for a decision as well. Do members have any concerns or comments relating to the highways issue? I'd initially put no on that, but actually there are some concerns about the adequacy of the access, isn't there? Yeah, so I'm just capturing that. So we have to look at whether that can be improved in any way. I don't know whether Ahmad wants to comment on the adequacy of it now, but there's no reason, again, I can't put this on the list to go back. And then I say, sorry, just bear with me a second, Ahmad. And then in addition to all that, I'll just very quickly reiterate, it is difficult. You need more information, you're not convinced and need to be. And then there's the issue about detail about the biodiversity, carbon capture, what additional can be provided to the community in terms of community reuse agreement to improve that situation. Need to understand what the real issue is about the improving the existing pitch drainage, etc. And the problems that creates. Public access to the existing path, if that can be facilitated outside school hours. And obviously, as I mentioned, the 3G pitch. I think that probably covers everything. Do you want to just answer that? Sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. If I may, Chair. I just want to clarify that the access has actually been improved as part of the school expansion. It is 4.5 to 5.1 meters wide. So that is actually according with the street design guide requirements for the proposed use. We can't widen the access any further because of trees and land constraints. The access further with the car park that you saw on the site visit has a lay-by that was again proposed as part of the expansion. The access onto Gypsy Lane has got a highway scheme to provide no waiting double yellow lines in sense to improve visibility displays and to make it safer for ins and outs. So the access Belmouth is actually is all fine. So I don't know what members' views are for highways to come back with what other improvements that you're asking for. The parking is so I think Councillor Campbell, you commented slightly about parking. The community use, so based on their worst case scenario of having a rugby pitch is so you would have 30 players, 8 subs, 1 referee, 2 touchline judges, plus
can I just stop you there before we get too deep into the detail? It goes back to the comment about the agreement about community use, because if you're doing what you say, which is a team, 2 teams, plus a couple of referees and some lines, men, women, etc., then that's a fixed number. Yes, I understand that. But for example, one I've just been dealing with, you have a particular group, so a sports group, a football group, for example, who may have half a dozen young people's teams who can all do practice on a pitch this size, because it's a big one. So you're actually then saying, well, if we actually have, I don't know, Beeston Football Club junior section doing practice on there, which they like to do, then you're actually going to need a lot more. So it goes back to this argument about what's the detail of the community agreement, because that specifies exactly how many people will be there and how they're going to get in and out. And at that point, I think you might be able to say yes or no.
I haven't said anything at all, and I've been taking all this in. And the clear issue here is about, the school can sit there and say, yes, they've got access. We know as local ward members, most academies don't give that. Yeah, and I need some assurances to put this through to say that the school, that the community use is throughout when the school's not operating. That's the crux of it.
Sorry, all I was going to say was that, yeah, I've just added that to my list about obviously a detailed community use agreement to cover those issues. The only other thing, because I don't want to prolong this any further, if I might just add, and it'd be just one less task to deal with, I suppose. What Ahmed has actually just said about the access itself and the improvements were done when the school was extended, that is considered to be adequate for this use. So what I'm trying to do is take that one off, as it were.
Chair.
But the rest of it, I
Remember,
understand.
I raised it. I will accept what Ahmed said.
Right, sorry, I didn't catch that. So I'm taking it from the panel that I don't have to pursue any further widening because that's done. Thank you. That's all I wanted to clarify. Sorry, Chair. Yeah, Chair's just asked where do we go from here? I mean, because this is obviously. I'm having a glass of wine. No, I'm not. I'm not drinking. No. This is a position statement. So I think I've summarised what are the issues. And as I say, succinctly, it's just the fact that the panel are not convinced this is the optimum solution. And there's a lot to be done by the applicant. I've gone through what the list is. But that's what I'm, yeah. So, yeah, I've got that down. And
I think Hans want to add.
Just actually raise one other issue that's on my mind about the highways. Where the car park is going to be that the community are meant to use, what about anybody with disabilities? Because it's quite a distance. It's going to be quite a distance. So in other words, if there is anyone with disability, it's been used for disabled sport, and we've already heard that there are double yellow lines, so people shouldn't be parking on double yellow lines. How are we going to manage if people need to be dropped off for any reason at all for these types of things? And also, the other thing as well is, I don't know what we can do about this, but I've got a bad experience just now in my area about forcing these through before we have a chance to tighten up on some of the conditions. And it's how we can be sure that at the end of the day, that if we put conditions on, they will be adhered to before development takes place, because otherwise I've got a bad experience just now. And also with construction management, how are they going to get access to the site in terms of construction management? Where are the crew, the people who are going to do the work, where are they going to park? Are they going to be parking in the school site and then walking out, or are they going to be parking at the top of the lane, park at the top of the lane? Now, I know that's not precise, but these are other highways issues that I think we need to be satisfied with, that the community, because there's some housing nearby. So are these houses suddenly going to find that they're parking in their side street because they can't park any closer because of the double yellow lines? What's the potential outflow from it?
We'll get back to this, Councillor Anderson, if it do come back to planning, then we can put all the restriction in place. Today is just to decide, are we supporting it, that it could come back, or it shouldn't come back. So if it does come back, then all these restrictions with highways and the other agencies, trees and whatever, we will invite those people and look into it and put whatever restriction need to put in place. Is that okay?
So just to conclude, and I don't want to go through the list again, I've added onto the list the disabled access to pitches and drop-off facilities and the construction management plan, which tends to be standard condition anyway, as you know. And I mean, in terms of enforcement, we do obviously enforce the conditions through the normal process. So all of this will be captured and put in the minutes. The minutes obviously will be presented to yourselves, and if you think there's anything that's missing, obviously you'll have an opportunity to discuss that at the further panel. And in the meantime, the applicant obviously will be informed of all of this in writing, and they'll have to address the point.
Thanks, Chair. Steve, could you just try and clarify whether any playing pitches or of any type were lost during the last extension, please?
There was some hard play loss as a consequence, yes.
Okay. Thank you. So should we leave it like this, that it will come back to us at some point when officers and the applicant decided what to do? So can I thank you all for your patience